Hello, and welcome to episode 42 of Do You Expect Us to Talk? I'm Becca, and joining me as always are Dave and Chris and special guest Charlie Brigden. How are you all?
Hello!
Hi, folks.
Hi.
I have to admit, I'm much warier of our listening audience than I was during Bond. Because I know Bond better. There is so much Star Trek out there. And there are people who know it in much more depth than I do. We'll come to sort of our histories with it, but I know, for example, Discovery's coming fairly soon, and we'll talk about that a bit later.
Can't wait for that.
We'll talk about that later in this run of shows. We won't talk about it much tonight, but I know that there's been references to a certain event just before TOS, and I've seen all sorts of talk over social media about what that event could be, and most of it went right over my head. And I consider myself a Star Trek fan. So, yeah, there's a lot I don't know, and there's a big universe of it out there.
I also think like the fans of Star Trek are a bit more, so to say, hardcore than they are like Bond fans. I mean, I think Bond. I think you can kind of you could have disagreements with Bond fans, and it'd be kind of on like still friendly terms.
Yeah, a couple of headbutts and it's all over.
I think with Bond and Star Trek, they're such opposite things. I mean, Bond is all about the leading man with the star and everything, and it's all kind of wish fulfillment. And Bond is very much a general audience's thing, whereas Star Trek has always been kind of an alternate thing, and I think from like the kind of the social outcasts and things like that.
Yeah, I think so. And not only that, there's a big... I mean, imagine if Game of Thrones had 730-odd episodes.
Yeah.
With different continents and different leads and different things and film spin-offs and cartoons and everything else. The lore is quite dense. And it can get a bit fucking dick-waving over who knows most.
Exactly.
And all the rest of it, and that's really not the case with Bond. I mean, yes, there are continuation novels, and there is a lot of trivia around it, and there are people who know more than we do.
Trek's
just bigger. Yeah, not bigger in popularity, but certainly bigger in amount of it.
Yeah, the worst with Bond is the over the normal. Who's your favourite Bond, or who was the best Bond? That's when it gets kind of. A bit nasty with Bond fans and, like you say, general audiences around. So, whereas with Star Trek fans, it generally is Star Trek fans.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not necessarily.
It does seem a much more core part of your identity if you're a big Star Trek fan than if you're a big Bond fan. I think.
This is my argument with Bond though, because it always seems more like if people are a fan of something, it's gonna be like Game of Thrones or Star Trek or Star Wars, whereas Bond is kind of a bit more left field. It's more common for people to say, "Oh, you're a fan of Trek," rather than a fan of Bond, for example. I don't know why, but that's just my thinking.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there seems to be kind of I don't know if this actually is true, but it seems to be like certainly in kind of like a jokey media kind of way. There's like a certain rivalry between your Star Trek or your Star Wars, and I don't think that there's a rivalry there. I don't think any of that it exists.
No, it's true.
The punch-ups I've had with people over whether we prefer Chinatown or Big Trouble in Little China.
Well, I think the answer's obvious there, isn't it? Big Trouble, of course.
Yeah,
easy.
Funny thing is, I knew just before I said, and I thought, I don't know, Chris is the only one who's going to answer that, and he will say Big Trouble in Little China. But. Yeah, I mean, it's got star in the title. To be fair...
I think so. That sounds like I was joking, but in reality, I'm generally being serious.
No, I know you are. But, I mean, William Shatner and Carrie Fisher have kind of wound it up a little bit by taking pot shots at each other over the years. But generally, they are different genres that happen to just have a lot of space in them.
Yeah, I'd say... And I say this as a kind of as a guy who's only really watched the films, and I don't think I've even seen all the films all the way through. Star Trek is more actual sci-fi. I mean, I was going to say that to me, if you was going to think what's the pinnacle like sci-fi like medium out there, whether it's TV or film, it is Star Trek. There's stuff that's gone back since like in the 50s that where sci-fi started. But I think if you had to nail down what sci-fi is as an essence, I think Star Trek is the best example of that. Where Star Wars is kind of just like, well, basically it's just an action adventure.
We'll talk about it a lot next week, because certainly the first Star Trek film is very, very Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, and it's also, in final execution, a little bit of a reaction to Star Wars, but we'll get to that. They're very, very different. I think Star Wars has a greater sense of wonder about it. I'll certainly say that, because it's more in the fantasy genre.
Yeah, I always see Star Wars as being fantasy, because it's all about kind of like knights and things and princesses, and also with the kind of Western flavour as well. That Star Trek admittedly has a bit of it as well. Yeah. But it's very much kind of about magic and things like that. And so yeah, there's very little science fiction apart from the kind of the dressing, the spaceships, things like that. But everything in essence is much more fantasy based.
There is. I mean, if you look at their approaches to it, the Millennium Falcon goes to light speed. We know there's a hyperdrive, but there's never any sort of explanation for that. Similarly, in the films, at least for lightsabers, I mean, we've heard about kyber crystals and everything else, but the fact is, generally speaking, it's just this hard light thing, and we just take it as read. With Star Wars, with Star Trek, there has been attempts over the years to explain how warp works, and so on. And sometimes it will be meaningless technobabble, but they will try to ground it in some kind of plausible vision of what the future might be.
So it all started with Gene Roddenberry. How did it come to light? Because I've heard the story of him dressing up as a cop.
He was a cop.
He actually worked as a cop for some time.
Cops tend to dress up.
That's illegal.
They keep having. They have a best cosplay award every week.
Gene Roddenberry cosplay award.
You look like a policeman today, Gene.
So authentic. How did you do that? Wow.
I mean, I'm hazy on the story, so I'm not entirely sure.
He quit. I mean, again, I'll get bits of it wrong, and
I've got a fun fact coming up. So watch this space.
We'll cover sort of some facts about Gene Roddenberry down the line then. But certainly he was. He wrote other things before this, but Star Trek was his big success. He didn't get it right first time though.
It took a couple of pilots, wasn't there? I think because two attempts to get onto the air.
Let's come back to TOS actually, because we have sort of loosely structured this show. Let's start with us and Trek individually. Not so much each series, because we'll go through them, but first memories of Trek, first thing that drew you towards it. I guess we start with Charlie as the big Trek fan.
The thing that brought me to Star Trek was BBC Two. In the 80s, BBC Two used to run at tea time, 6 o'clock, used to run a load of science fiction films, American science fiction films from the 50s. So you had stuff like Forbidden Planet and things like that, and Fantastic Voyage. So all these great sci-fi films were on at tea time when we could all kind of sit down and watch them. And at the same time, they were rerunning episodes of the original Star Trek series. So from there, I used to kind of watch it with my mother, and just got kind of really, really into it. And then starting to see the films, and it just kind of made me into an absolute hardcore fan. I was kind of dwindled over the years a little bit. I kind of lost it halfway through Voyager, missed Enterprise out completely.
Well, it's been a long ride.
And then didn't,
18 odd years, but
when you're on your own. And then kind of came back to it when the new films came back around, and then it's I love Star Trek. I have a reasonably large Star Trek Enterprise tattooed on my forearm, which is kind of the ultimate proof. So I'll tweet that at some point. But yeah,
after 3 films, we're going to blow that arm up and build him a new one.
It does seem to be staple lore to, like, when you get to the third film, blow up the Enterprise.
Just blow shit up.
Yeah, we'll get to it. We'll try not to spoil too much more, actually, because some of you may be watching along with us and you haven't seen them before. We know we've got a few people who aren't really fans, but they sort of came to us during the Bond series or whatever. My story's extremely similar in that Charlie and I are around the same age. BBC Two. I was trying to remember if it was a Tuesday or Wednesday night. I forget which.
Well, after school, like around 6 o'clock.
Yeah, 6 o'clock that it used to be on. And I don't know if it was at the same time as The Invaders. The Invaders was on another night, but I can't remember if that replaced Star Trek within off-series or whatever.
I can't remember, because I remember around the same time Battlestar Galactica was on as well.
Yeah. So whether they all ran at the same time on different nights, we don't know. But certainly the original series was playing. I reckon I probably saw, at a complete guess, 30-odd episodes that way, in that it was weekly for quite a while. And then suddenly it disappeared. And it disappeared to allow the Next Generation to start. And we'll get to the Next Generation a little bit later on, but I think it's no spoiler to anyone to say it doesn't start overly well. So I kind of went away from it in disgust until somebody at school said to me, "Oh, it's got a lot better now," and I started watching it again in that slot. And I think a few years went by, and literally there was a Blockbusters near me that were renting them all out, so I went through them all via video. Original series and Next Generation. So they're the two shows I know really well. But you guys are not such... you haven't seen as much of it.
No, I mean, I'm going to be a bit rubbish. It's kind of similar to my first memory of Bond. I don't really remember that well having one, but it's kind of integrated in my memory. You know, I remember seeing flashes of the film, so I'll probably say it's probably more the films when it's been shown on BBC One or something. I remember seeing flashes of like Rafa Khan or the motion picture and stuff like that. As for the TV show, I think I remember it being on, but again, not really having that much interest in it because I wasn't really a huge fan. But I did kind of enjoy watching the films. As they got on, but I was never a huge fan. It is a surprising thing. I mean, the only Star Trek film I saw at the cinema was Undiscovered Country, and next Star Trek film I saw at the cinema was the reboot one. So, you know, that kind of level shows my kind of... I didn't really have that much of an interest in Star Trek, though I will say I kind of respected it, but just thought it just wasn't for me, but I enjoyed it if it was on. Type of thing. So if it was on TV, I'll watch it, but I won't necessarily go and seek it out. Becca?
Yeah, pretty much the same, really. I think I probably came to Star Trek probably again like through my dad, who's a big sci-fi fan. He got it from his dad, my granddad. Like Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, sort of writers like that, really. I've not seen too much. I think I've only seen like the motion picture. I've only seen that years ago. I don't recollect much of the other original series Trek films, so I'll be seeing those through fresh eyes, as it were. I've seen all the Next Generations films, and I've obviously seen the reboot movies. But it's been a while since I saw like the Next Generation set of films, so it'll be good to review those again with fresh eyes. I don't really have the same memories as you guys. Not sort of growing up with that so much. But it's kind of it's been around in the background, and generally because I'm a bit interested in sci-fi anyway. So I've kind of come to it, through that angle.
You got Bond through your dad as well. It does worry me that what if your dad's favourite programme had been Pebble Mill at 1? Like, what would the landscape of your fandom be as an adult?
Dave, no one's favourite programme was Pebble Mill at 1.
Alan Titchmarsh, Adam Morley.
No.
But no, so I think what Becca said. I think it was just more because I was more of an. I like me action films even as a younger child, and that's probably what drew me to things like Bond more. So whereas Star Trek was something a bit more thoughtful and more about ideas and when people sort of like talking, debating stuff and deciding things. I was like, yeah, just get to the shooting. I want the violence, death. Damn it. So just like, yeah, it's not for me. So, but now I can probably appreciate it a lot more. Now I've matured a little bit.
You've got a long way to reach my level.
I think your levels of maturity are a long way off yet, Dave.
They're practically unmeasurable.
So yeah, I mean, yeah. My fan base has always been set a bit more around action orientated because Star Trek wasn't necessarily set around action. I mean, if you had like an action set Star Trek, it's not really the Star Trek really. I mean, if I think I'm sure we'll get into in the films when they start doing it up, but more the action stuff, it stops being kind of like Star Trek. It stops being like what even I would say it defeats the purpose of what is the point of what is Star Trek.
So yeah, I guess the thing now, I mean, the only really TOS and TNG are really relevant to the films, but we will take a whip through them. It does start with obviously the original series, 1966 to 69. It turns 50 during this run. September the 8th, it will turn 50 years old. Charlie, talk to us a little bit about what is it about TOS that appeals?
I guess back then, especially, it was so different to everything else. Even growing up watching the other kind of sci-fi shows that are around, and from American side of things, you had like the Twilight Zone, which I didn't really see that much of as a kid. But then you had other stuff like Lost in Space and the Time Tunnel and Land of the Giants and things like that, which were a bit more kind of whimsical. Yeah. And then you had Star Trek come along, which seemed much more like a kind of a film, and just kind of the ideas it had. And the kind of really deadly serious way it took on those ideas, and then used kind of the science fiction kind of allegory that kind of all the best science fiction media works do, and using the whole thing as an allegory, and this whole kind of family crew, and just the way it kind of developed into the relationship between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and those three, and then it kind of branched out, and it was just fantastic to kind of see, and nowadays you can just turn on and you sit on the Sci-Fi Channel or anything, and there's all sorts of ridiculous things, or the films now, and everything is just kind of like wall to wall, to the point where it's difficult to imagine being at a point where this was like your weekly source of wonder. I mean, for instance, the episode The Corbomite Maneuver, where kind of goes through all the episode with this kind of scary alien ship and this big alien on the view screen that looks terrifying, and then you kind of get to the end of it, and it's a little alien child. Yeah, exactly. That is looking to the same thing.
Gentlemen
the Enterprise
of the future.
The Enterprise is doing, and trying to seek out new life. And it's just the way that's presented, and these kind of things that you don't just from point of views that you don't kind of think about. Mm. And then obviously at the same time there was kind of like Russia with the Cold War and all that sort of thing, and all the racial tension as well. So it was, and all about Star Trek has always been about kind of working together for the future, and nothing really underlines that more than the original series for me.
Yeah, I mean, with me, the hardest thing to admit as a Trek fan to Trek fans who are listening is I only think about 40 to 50% of Star Trek's any good. All of it, I mean. I think there's an awful lot of filler. We're still in, even when you get to the later series, we're still in an era of them trying to crank out 26 episodes a year. And it's very hard to keep the quality up. I mean, I'm quite pleased Discovery's only going to be 13. I think that's a much, much more sensible run. Mm. Star Trek also had the twin problem of money. It was never properly funded. It wasn't really, really wanted by NBC. And in fact, it was made by Desilu Studios, which is Desi Arnaz and Lucy. And it was Lucille Ball who stepped in and actually got the thing made. So it was never really wanted by NBC, and so there's not a lot of money there. And the second problem is, for all of Gene Roddenberry's considerable, well, he offered Star Trek to the world, so I can't knock him too hard, but he was notorious for rewriting other writers. And he also had this thing about there could be no conflict between the crew. So, and as Jonathan Frakes, who's a Next Generation crew member, pointed out, that's the opposite of drama. So they had a lot of problems with this. Roddenberry starts fading into the background about halfway through the second series, and their budget just gets dropped every year. So what you've got is a very good first season, but it's 29 episodes. So again, there's filler in that. Second season's pretty good. And then the third season has got some gems, but it's some of the worst TV you'll ever see. And Shatner goes backwards as an actor. You watch him in the first couple of few episodes, and he's slim and fit and good. And by the last series, I tune out about halfway through the episodes. There are far too many fistfights in TOS, which is why I'm more of a TNG guy. So Chris is right. It's not an action show. It is about working together, but it was sold as Wagon Train to the Stars. So I think of TOS as much more about exploration, and TNG as being much more about diplomacy. So TOS, they turn up much more often, places they've never seen, people they've never seen, political circumstances they've never seen. And they all beam down together, because this got corrected in TNG, the idea that the captain and first officer aren't supposed to go leave the ship together. That's a single point of failure. But it does mean that you've got them walking into towns or planets they don't know, and then dealing with what's there. Whereas much more in TNG, they're dealing with races they know, species they know, and it's about how they deal with some of the tensions between all of them. And yes, they do go places that they haven't been before, but it's much more about diplomacy. So TOS to me is a patchy show. It is a dated show, but that triumvirate of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy has never been matched in any other edition of Trek at all. So I'm a fan of about half of it in episode terms. I actually sort of prefer the films simply because just the more modern sensibility, and also Shatner's a better actor and Kirk is a better character in the films for me. So that's me with TOS. Charlie's going to tell us a little bit more about it, and we'll explore it more with some episodes in a minute. What about you guys with the original series?
Again, I don't really have much experience with the series, though my general gut feeling is, because I know it's a question, well, which one are you, Kirk or you Picard fan? And
you're allowed to be both. I don't understand.
Well, I know, but it's always that debate. Well, who's the best though? It's like Connery or Moore, or
well, that was easy.
Well,
Janeway.
Yeah, all right, Becca.
No, just no.
Commander Paris.
Simply because she was a woman.
It's like the Lazenby of the series.
We'll get to Voyager a bit later on, briefly.
Yeah. Well, it's got back there, so it could be right.
So have you seen many episodes, Chris?
No, I can't say. I mean, I've seen some in passing, but I've started to watch a few of the original series. I think because of probably the films, to my speaking, but I do prefer Kirk as a captain, because I think he's a bit more of a rebel. He's a swashbuckler. He likes to sort of like get by the seat of his pants and just like devil may care kind of attitude, whereas Picard's a bit more thoughtful. He's probably more someone you probably want as a captain, but then again, what makes the show work is like you said. I think probably Picard's probably a better ambassador for Star Trek, but his surrounding crew aren't as interesting as Kirk's. Kirk's is his own character, and he's got the other characters to back him up. We can break it down to the core three, like Spock and McCoy. You got that perfect balance of that thing. Spock's the one is more like into like or thinking more the logical thing without any emotion, which Kirk is the opposite. He's all about kind of like emotion, and McCoy's like the skeptic, going like, what the fuck are you doing? He's like dousing everything, which kind of adds like a nice little bit of humour. But it's a nice balance, and I think the whole other crew with Scotty, Uhura, Sulu, are all kind of principally a lot more colourful and a lot more, there's a lot more to them than, say, the Next Gen, in my opinion. I'm sure people might disagree, but
we'll talk about that when we get to TNG, because I've got a view on that, certainly.
Yeah, I must say I'm probably more familiar with the Next Generation, because that's kind of what I grew up with, if I were to grow up with this series. I think the most thing I admire about Trek, really, is obviously Roddenberry wanted to kind of not unite people, but kind of obviously had it got multiracial crew. I mean, you've got like sort of prominent African American actors and Asian actors in prominent roles as first sort of TV show to do that, really, in terms of like a sci-fi genre. There
are stories. Sorry to interrupt, but it's something I've just read only in the last couple of days, because I've read part 1 of the 50-year mission, which is a book about obviously the whole 50 years, and the first book is supposed to be the first 25 years, and it is, because it goes through to 91, the last of the original crew films. But part 2, although it's meant to be the second 25 years, is actually going to cover all of Next Gen, which is a bit earlier than that. But it said that Roddenberry would get affiliates in some part of the Bible Belt South, saying that they wouldn't show it because there was a black woman on the crew.
Oh, God.
And Roddenberry would literally say, "Fuck you, then."
Well, exactly. This is it. Exactly. This is, it's just because obviously with sort of 50s and 60s, sort of racial tensions in America, and obviously here in England as well, but obviously being predominantly American TV series, there's a lot of firsts from this show, which I think is really good. It's a real trailblazing series, I think. Some of the episodes now have dated horribly, but it's to be expected. I was watching, is it The Devil in the Dark, about the monster that tunnels?
Yeah, we'll get to The Devil in the Dark in a bit. That's Charlie's going to name some, and I know he's going to name The Devil in the Dark, so we won't go into it too much here.
No, I'm just saying in terms of like the set and everything, you can see it's made out of
It's the hardest to watch for a younger viewer now.
Yeah, I have to say I struggled with that one. I mean, in terms of like the plot and everything, I think it's really clever, and it's something you don't expect, and also shows kind of great diplomacy, and also really clever writing that a lot of TV lacks today. But yeah,
stop there on Devil in the Dark, because we're going to talk about it in a little while.
No, I'm just going to say it's quite good to say about it, just because it's dated horribly and it looks fake. But
so
I would have to say I prefer Next Generation.
Have you seen many TOS episodes?
I'm working my way through them.
Okay. So just a handful at the moment?
Oh God, I've seen them for. They've been repeated on TV and things like that, so I've sort of seen them, but I haven't seen all of them yet, to be honest. So I'm kind of working my way through them as and when I can. So. Okay,
well, on the assumption that there's going to be people listening to this who... I mean, the thing with any film series is the film should stand alone. You should be able to stick on The Wrath of Khan, and it doesn't matter what the precursor to it was. But the thing is, you've got a bit of time now, and I just think it's worth having a primer. So Charlie and I have looked at some episodes for TOS and TNG. Charlie sort of named a few for TOS. He's going to sort of take us through them now, talk about why he's chosen them, and we'll talk about whether we've seen them and so on. Charlie?
Yeah. Starting with what was the second pilot, which is an episode called Where No Man Has Gone Before. As mentioned earlier, that there was 2 initial pilots. One was called The Cage, and this second, Where No Man Has Gone Before. The actual first episode to air was an episode called The Man Trap. That was the first, so none of the pilots initially aired.
Which is why, if you watch them in release order now, suddenly in the 3rd episode, like, they're all wearing different uniforms. Because they're wearing the uniforms from the first pilot. But it's kind of not roll necks, but yeah.
So when
I wonder about that.
So When a Man Has Gone Before is just a really nice kind of introduction to the show, especially since the Cage, which we'll talk about in a minute, in a different form, did not star William Shatner. It instead starred an actor called Jeffrey Hunter as Captain Pike. who everyone knows now from the J.J. Abrams New Trek, as they call it. But with When I Was Gone Before, you had this. It was really kind of a really kind of somber episode, and again, like I said before, the seriousness of Star Trek really kind of came through, and it had a relationship between Kirk and another crewman, Gary Mitchell, and eventually, with what happening is Kirk has to go up against Gary Mitchell after he turns evil, and it's kind of the kind of emotional side that it brought to that, along with the kind of the real sense of Star Trek being something new, especially since When a Man Has Gone Before originally did not have the main title theme or any of that kind of music, as the others did. So it had different music. It was it was a bit more kind of serious, and it's just a real good primer for the type of show Star Trek is.
I know, and if you've ever wanted to see William Shatner versus the movie version of Hot Lips Houlihan,
yeah, exactly, yeah,
yeah, it is a really, really good episode. Have we all seen this one yet?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think I watched it in prep for Into Darkness, thinking like, oh, this is going to be like this is going to be like what it's going to be based on, really, not like not calm what everyone else is thinking.
Yeah, well, because if you cast a British gentleman, of course it's going to be calm and interesting. All right, Charlie. So next up, you've mentioned The Cage.
Yeah. So while The Cage was not aired in its original format, it was instead transmitted as an episode called The Menagerie. It was a 2-part episode, and what it did really cleverly is used a lot of the footage from The Cage in with a new episode. So what happened in The Cage, you had Captain Pike and the Enterprise, and he was trapped by these aliens called the Telosians in a kind of zoo kind of thing. And on the actual episode of Menagerie, it turned out that there was a relationship between him and Mr. Spock, meant that Spock wanted to. He basically stole the Enterprise to take Captain Pike back to the planet, because in the time between, he had become very how should I say, burned, I think is probably the correct term.
He could only communicate with. He was in this special sort of chair, if you like, and he can communicate a bit like people who've been paralysed might be able to sort of communicate with one eyelid. He can communicate with this beep system through the thing. It's not Jeffrey Hunter playing him at this point. So he's very heavily made up, and he's just been in a bad accident, and his only means of communication and movement is this one sort of beep. So they take him back to the Telosians, because the Telosians can basically create illusions.
Yeah.
And we're introduced for the first time to the Orion slave girls as well. Those of you who've seen the J.J. Abrams film, the first one, we mean the Green Women.
Yes.
This is my favourite episode of Star Trek,
really?
I'd say, of the original series. Yeah, you'd think, because what we've described as a clip show, but it just that doesn't do it justice.
No, not at all. And it's really interesting that you talk about Roddenberry not wanting conflict, but here is a conflict between Spock, who, especially since it's supposed to be the cool, logical one, and Starfleet and Kirk, and it's really interesting to show that and how that plays out.
Yeah, now you're talking about it, actually reminds me of a Next Gen episode called Clues, where Data is literally been told not to tell them what's going on. And it's similar here. Spock is not saying what's happening. It introduces us to the Federation. It introduces us to sort of admirals and all the rest of it. And it also introduces us to, certainly in this timeline, it won't be the same in what we will come to talk about as the Kelvin timeline later in the series. If you don't know what that is, we'll explain it later. That they've got different insignias for different ships.
Yeah.
And I think people have come to think of the insignia as Starfleet, and at this time it wasn't.
No.
So yeah, we need that. But yeah, it's a terrific episode. The one you're going to name next, I was really surprised how tense it was.
Oh yeah, no, it's absolutely one of the best, which is Balance of Terror, which is all about the first time they see not only a Romulan ship but a Romulan. So the kind of setup is that there's a neutral zone with the Romulans, and this area where no one's supposed to go, and no one's seen a Romulan. But all they know is there has been a conflict with them and the Federation on Earth amongst the years. And then it turns out that starbases along the neutral zone are being attacked, and the Enterprise is, as usual, the only ship in the area. You always wonder, with the amount of ships that Starfleet supposedly has,
a bit more
it's always the Enterprise.
To be fair, but yeah.
Yeah.
So for those who aren't like accustomed to Star Trek, what are the Romulans?
The Romulans, well, they could kind of, you've got the Romulans who are like.
Can I just interrupt to say we don't know at the start of this episode?
Yeah.
Okay, so there is a reveal in this, because I know what Charlie's about to say, and actually, for those listening, I think it's probably wise that we don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
The relevance, we ought to say the relevance of the Menagerie, the last one we discussed, is quite obviously introduces us to Christopher Pike, which is relevant for the film series. The relevance of this, and there's a few more when we talk in TNG, we introduce to the Romulans. The Romulans are relevant in... more in the next gen films, actually. They're relevant in Nemesis, and they're relevant in the Abrams reboot. If you've seen that, you probably have more of an idea. But certainly, it's the first time we see them, and it's tense, and it's also, I think it's a good lesson for those who would stereotype Kirk as hot-headed, because he's not. He's as cool as ice during this.
And very, very much of the show is based on racial equality and the notion of being able to get along with other fellow crew members, whatever colour, species they are. And yes, so very much this episode, the reveal Dave was talking about, and there's a crew member on there who is somewhat racially charged, and it's very much about kind of about solving those racial issues, and also. Obviously it was set at the height of the Cold War, about two different crews, two different captains on the opposite side of the war, but who aren't really kind of. It's not about what the war is about. It's not about all the history, all that. It's just about these two captains and how they work against each other, but also noticing things about each other, versus despite the fact that they are on completely opposite sides. It's notable as well that the Romulan captain is played by Mark Leonard, who would eventually go on to be Sarek, who was Spock's father, and also a Klingon in the opening of the motion picture. So, as far as I know, still to this date is the only person to play a Vulcan, a Romulan, and a Klingon.
I would think so. Balance of Terror, of all the ones you're going to name, could be dropped in. The two series are a lot more, the two main series we're going to talk about, TOS and TNG. There's a lot of differences between them, and I don't think the episodes generally cross over too well, even ones that are rewrites of previous. But I think of all of them, Balance of Terror could comfortably be a Next Generation episode.
Absolutely, and it's very much kind of like The Hunt for Red October. There's a lot of, depending on who's writing it at the time, there's a lot of talk about Star Trek being very much like submarines in space. I mean, it's definitely kind of more explicit in things like The Wrath of Khan.
Yeah,
exactly. But so But where you've got the two submarines in the ocean, and they're kind of, where are they? Do we know? That kind of thing, and kind of evading them and having to be creative with everything. And yes, the Balance of Terror is very much like watching an old war film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you guys seen it?
No, not yet.
Yeah, I have. So tense, so tense. I really enjoyed it. It took me a while for the penny to drop to realise who Mark Leonard was. I was like, oh yeah, But no, it's really good. It's one of the best pieces of TV I've seen in a long time, and that's saying something.
I think the next one you're about to name, Charlie, without giving it away, I think we talk about Kirk, Spock, and McCoy being a necessary series of interrelationships that create almost like a whole person, if you like, almost. I think the next episode you're going to name is what happens when one of them's marooned without the other two.
Exactly.
And what limitations they have without the other two.
The Galileo 7. Which
or as we like to call it, Flight of the Phoenix.
It is exactly the same plot.
Yeah,
which is named after the Galileo 7, the shuttlecraft, which is basically where you go into, you have one of those team building exercises where it says you're crashed on a in the desert somewhere, and you've got this and you've got this and you've got this, and you'll have to work together to sort out these items and then put them in the correct order so you can all be survive. And it's all so basically that's what happens with Spock leading the away team, leading the team on this, and where you have Spock's logic and Spock seeing things in a very clearly logical manner versus the other members of the team with him who are quite disagreeable and who are not willing to work with him to solve their issue of being stranded on this planet. And like Dave said, without the because the way the triangle of Spock, Kirk, and McCoy works so well against each other to come up with a complete idea and complete solutions. Only having one of those three people there is a great example of showing the strength of that relationship.
It is the sort of episode as well that if you were just glancing through, if you've not seen them or you've seen them years ago, and you're glancing through little plot synopsis on Netflix, which is where they're all on Netflix at the time of recording, by the way. Every episode of every series of Star Trek is on there at the moment, worldwide. So you shouldn't have a problem getting this anywhere. You would look at the Galileo 7 and it looks like a filler episode. It looks like, they've just got them in a little thing down there, and it's just, but it really isn't. There's some really important characterization in there.
And a fun fact about this one is that the obviously you mentioned earlier about Star Trek not having so much of a big budget. They built a full-size shuttlecraft, and the people who actually funded that were a model company called AMT. And what they did is they funded that in exchange for the rights to be able to make a model kit out of that and sell it.
Cool.
So yeah, I guess the relevance of this episode is again, I think it's flavour for the world and some of the themes of working together, and also its background on Spock, because it's the same when we get to Data later on in TNG, that they're supposed to be emotionless. Well, in Spock's case, it's suppressed emotion, but same basic principle. They've got to cheat with that a little bit, just a little bit, because Data ends up wanting certain things. Well, that's kind of an emotion. And I think here, Spock is, although he doesn't show overt emotion, he's genuinely, I think, unsettled that the crew aren't following what makes perfect sense to him.
Yeah.
And it's played really, really well.
Absolutely. And the next one I'll talk about is an obvious one. Space Seed.
If you watch one episode, listeners, watch this one.
Obviously,
is it?
Films,
I'm always interested by this one because of its relevance to, shall we say, quite a favourite of the film of franchise of Star Trek. Is it that well revered now because of that film, or was it really well revered back then that he thought it was a good idea to kind of do a sequel to that?
I mean, in terms of what happened with, I think we can say it's Wrath of Khan.
Okay. I didn't want to sort of ruin it just in case.
I mean, you can watch Wrath of Khan without watching this episode, folks.
Yeah.
But if you are going to dip into episodes and you've got limited time, it makes sense to watch Spacey because the Wrath of Khan is a sequel to it.
Yeah, basically with Wrath of Khan, what they did is before they made it, they went back and they watched all of the original series episodes to find which would be the strongest one to have a sequel to, and then picked Spacey and then went on from there. I mean, it's a great episode anyway. We talk about the fist fights, and this is the greatest episode for that, apart from maybe Arena. And Montalban's so good in the part. But again, it's a real interesting kind of idea. So they pick up the ship, and it turns out that the ship's got all these people in suspended animation from the 1990s, and it turns out it's
they get them out and it's Oasis.
So he was genetically engineered, so it's got all these kind of the moral quandary there, which Star Trek is always so well at doing, and then Kirk being threatened and kind of whether or not his crew will kind of go against him, because Khan is a very, very charismatic man. And it's just a great episode, and certainly one of the best, whether or not Khan exists or not, really.
I kind of was surprised somewhat how they actually there was almost sympathetic to Khan in some aspects. I mean, they gave him a love interest, which actually, I think it makes watching Wrath of Khan more impactful because you've got context to why he's essentially so pissed. Because if you watch just Wrath of Khan, you just see like it. It just plays as like, well, his motivation is just pure revenge.
And then of course we get to the film, Chris, and all he's focused on is Kirk.
Yeah.
And Kirk's almost forgotten him. Or it's not that he's forgotten him because he does recognise him, but he hasn't thought about him in years.
But I think it works so well because you got context for that revenge. You kind of understand why he would be pissed. But we'll get to Wrath of Khan a bit more. But I think it's what it was. I was quite surprised how like they didn't like even back then. Khan wasn't like your flat out stereotypical baddie. He wasn't like there was like a sense of humanity to him.
He's benevolent. I mean, he cares about his crew. There is a continuity error when we get to Into Darkness that really pisses me off because all you got to do is watch Spacey. Like, there's a lot wrong with that film, but it's the fact that it's the numbers involved. It's like, well, how did you fucking miscount? It's one episode. But anyway.
Have you seen it, Becca?
I have, yes. No, I really enjoyed it. I thought Ricardo Montalban was very magnetic, I think. I feel bad for the historian. It kind of gets, rather than being court-martialed, is sent off to live with Khan.
Her choice.
Well, no, yeah, exactly. She follows him, but it's like, oh.
Yeah, she's in love,
Yeah, she's falling for him, but no, I think I haven't seen. I probably remember seeing Wrath of Khan sometime on BBC and there somewhere. Largely forgotten, unfortunately. But I'll come to it in a minute. But I wonder if it is one of those episodes where you may have to watch Spacey before watching Wrath of Khan. I don't know, to get a bit of background to it, but I don't know. Probably not.
I don't think you need to.
No.
I saw Spacey years after the Wrath of Khan,
sure.
And we're recommending it. I think it's a good episode to watch. I think it's always better the more background you have.
Yeah.
But in all honesty, films should stand alone, and the Wrath of Khan does.
Sure.
Absolutely.
But the next one, as we've already mentioned, I think of all the ones you're going to name, this is going to be the hardest one for a new viewer. But I think it is so fundamentally Star Trek.
Absolutely. And that is the Devil in the Dark, which we mentioned earlier.
Sorry, I skipped ahead a little bit. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Again, it's an incredible episode. And for those who haven't seen it, basically, the Enterprise is joined this mining planet, where these miners keep getting attacked by some kind of monster, and it's kind of the turnaround with what actually happens and how the issue is resolved is just absolutely, like Dave said, classic Star Trek, and all about working together and recognizing that the universe is full of, like Spock is and the Vulcans are favourite of saying, infinite diversities in infinite combinations. And it's all about how we work amongst those diversities and all those different people and aliens and whatever races, all this kind of thing, how we work with those and how we recognize that while what we think we're doing may be something to benefit us and maybe a benevolent act to others may be seen as threatening. And especially somewhere where there's a completely different language barrier and all sorts of different things. And I think certainly in society today, it is very, very relevant, and also has the greatest line in the history of Star Trek, which is, "Damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer." Which is just fantastic.
It is relevant.
Yeah.
I think almost any other sci-fi or any other show that attempted anything like this, we won't give away the actual ending, but it would end in a shootout of some kind, and this doesn't. Now, Star Trek could be, at its worst, it could be really preachy. I mean, there are some really clunky episodes later on that are trying to tell you racism is bad and okay. You know, there's one called "Let This Be Your Last Battlefield," and it's fucking rubbish because it's so heavy-handed. But this wraps a message in something else entirely and does it really well.
And I think this is an important one as well, which I think you were saying earlier about people accepting this episode, is how something which I've learned a lot of people today don't really know, either don't want to do or don't know how to do, but is learning to look at things in context. In context of when things are made, in context of what was happening when things were made, what was going on, and also, like you said, things like budget, that kind of thing. And
because the monster in this is basically covered in a big carpet.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's meant to be. It won't give too much away because it's fairly early in the episode you see it.
Yeah,
and it's meant to be kind of a rock monster. And it's clearly sort of got a fairly rock design blanket thrown over it. It's really poor visually, and that's not a judgment for all the reasons Charlie's just said, but it is going to be the heart. I think you can put on some of these we're talking about and just take them for what they are. This will pull some people out.
Yeah, you need to kind of look at this, and you need to kind of realize about like. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that Star Trek was really cleverly designed where there's a lot of things that are kind of hidden. Some things certainly not so much, like the thing in the Door of the Dark, which is called the Horta. But you have kind of like there's lots of things where there's like bubble wrap packaging and things like that used. I mean, it's something that's continued in sci-fi. I mean, I remember watching a documentary about Alien and parts of Alien, where they used ice cream trays and things like that. In Return of the Jedi, in the bunker,
razors and things like that.
There's a when they go into the bunker in Return of the Jedi to blow it up to get the shield down on Endor, all the shield parts, so the big things in the back are styrofoam cups that you get for coffee machines, just kind of piled up. But it's an amazing episode, and it's kind of like one of my revolving favourites.
Okay, the next one I would suggest is possibly the most famous TOS episode of the lot.
Yes, for a few reasons. The City on the Edge of Forever is kind of like the one that kind of everyone always kind of pulls up. It's a brilliant example of sci-fi. It has some really good interplay between Spock and Kirk and McCoy, and especially McCoy and Edith, Joan Collins, and the notion of being able to go back through the Guardian of Time. to be able to change things, and also destiny and fate, and whether changing things is a good thing or a bad thing, even if it appears on the surface to be a good thing, and how that emotionally affects our crew, and especially those three. It's also very famous in that the writer, Harlan Ellison, who's a very, very famous science fiction writer, was not a fan of the what happened in the final episode versus what he originally wrote, and he has kind of since then released versions of his script, and it's had like a comic adaptation and things like that. But it's just an absolute class episode.
Every time he's quoted quite extensively in the 50-year mission. And I have to say, not that it's taken out of context, but because that's the only context we have, he comes off as a bit of a misanthrope.
He always does.
Yeah, he doesn't come off well in that book. He's just doing nothing but whining. But it's not just whining, it's being quite insulting with it.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, unfortunately, that's the way things are for writers. They are bottom of the food chain when it comes to TV and film. But, I mean, it's a very good episode. I suppose the relevance of it is, firstly, how famous it is. I think if you're going to watch some TOS, you ought to watch this one. But also, again, we do get some time travel in the films. So it's quite interesting to see how they did it during the original series. Have you guys seen it?
No, not got to it yet.
It's the one with Joan Collins in it.
Yeah, this is the one I got to recently. I'm literally working my way through. Your list there, and I'll do the Next Generation kind of set of the list when we get to it. But yeah, I've seen this one most recently, and I was like, that looks like Joan Collins, because it is Joan Collins. But no, I think it's really interesting. I think it's one of the favourite episodes yet so far. Actually, it's quite a busy episode. There's a lot going on, and it sort of deal with like the depression and everything as well, which is really interesting. And again, you see a lot of that relationship between Spock and Kirk as well. And also, there's some really good comedic moments, how they try and hide Spock's ears, and how they try and explain away, why he looks the way he does. But no, it's really interesting. I think it's one of the highlights so far. So
it's also one of those episodes that, had they done this in the third season, Shatner would have shat on this, pun not intended, because he's quite bad by the time they get to the third series, in my opinion. He's overacting terribly. When you watch all of the episodes Charlie's naming here, William Shatner's brilliant in all of them. We'll get to it when we get to the films, because he's really good in the films, generally. And Nicholas Meyer, the director of a couple of the films, has a theory as to why, and a practice as to how he got those performances out of him. And we'll get to that. Yeah, Leonard Nimoy could get good performances out of him as well. But through the series, he got more and more over the top. But at this stage, he's really good. And he's good in this episode.
Yeah.
The next one, I think, Charlie, was one of the few I remembered liking, and then when I watched it, I'm not sure I liked it as much. This is very comedic, this one.
Yeah, I think that's the reason I love it so much is, and this is an episode called A Piece of the Action, and again, it's another example of Star Trek, and certainly the original series, where it was just going crazy in terms of kind of science fiction concepts. And what happens in this one is the Enterprise visits a planet where there's some kind of dispute, and it's a planet where hundreds of years ago a historian visited there from Earth and left a book about gangsters. So
just made me think of the Royale from the Next Generation.
Yeah. So when they've come back to this planet, it's just basically you've got 1920s New York gangsters just as a planet.
I tell you what it reminds me of. The way they all talk in it, Shatner included. Although Shatner is entitled to ham it up here because he is doing a bit, if you like. But you know in Diamonds Are Forever where they got in the car and it was like, I got a brother.
I got a brother.
Yeah, that's how everyone talks through the whole episode. It's really funny.
Oh, no.
And then Kirk starts joining in, so he's talking to everyone like that as well.
That's the thing. I mean, I think Star Trek, while I mentioned earlier about how serious it is a lot of the time, there is still a lovely sense of humour there. And again, that is definitely reflected in the films later on. I think by this time as well, the cast are really kind of having fun together, and you can kind of see that how they work off it. And yeah, Shatner here just is loving it, and where he's putting on this tough guy gangster accent is hilarious. But halfway because it's also absurd, but also because you can see not just how much Shatner's loving it, but how much Captain Kirk's loving it. You can see Kirk is taking a real thrill in it, especially
he starts to sort of swagger.
Yeah, especially
because he's effectively being a bit of a gangland boss for a while.
Yeah, and a gun and an arms dealer. But yeah. So this episode is just really, really, and especially the way Spock is kind of going on with it all. So you've got Kirk and Spock in zoot suits, and the way Spock is trying to adapt to this whole thing. Especially being a Vulcan, and the interplay between Kirk and Spock with that, and it's just it may seem an odd choice for me to pick to some people, but it's just one of those episodes that I really love.
This crew do comedy better than the Next Gen. Now, when you've got, there are episodes that finish like an episode of Thundercats. Yeah. You know, like the joke's on you, staff. Credits. There are episodes where Kirk sat in his chair laughing and they're slapping each other on the shoulder.
Naked Gun.
There are some cringe-making bits in this, but there is such a natural rapport, particularly between the main three and particularly between the main two, that they actually do comedy really well. And the relevance of this, Charlie's picked it because he likes it, but 4 is quite a comedic film. And you'll see that this crew were always able to do it. Charlie, the last one you picked, I think it comes actually before a piece of the action, but it was just the order we picked them in. This one is particularly relevant for one of the films later.
Absolutely. This is Amok Time, which is another one, a Kirk and Spock heavy episode, but where Spock is taken to the Vulcan homeworld because of his being betrothed to his Vulcan wife. And eventually the whole thing devolves into him fighting Captain Kirk, which is absolutely one of the most iconic scenes and images of Star Trek. And seeing not only these two friends and colleagues going against each other, but also the ingenious way that it's resolved with the help of Dr. McCoy.
It also introduces the concept of Ponfar. And that's helpful when we get to Star Trek 3.
Absolutely.
Charlie, if people have only got time to watch a couple, what would you say?
I'd say Space Seed, The Devil in the Dark, and City of the Edge of Forever. Honestly, I think if you had to pick one, I'd pick The Devil in the Dark. Despite what any misgivings people might have about that episode and the carpets, it's just such a good episode and such an important idea of what Star Trek is as a concept and as a philosophy that
it's very well, I only read today. I knew it was William Shatner's favourite episode, but I read today it was Leonard Nimoy's as well.
Oh wow!
So both of our main two named it as their favourite episode. It depends how you want to look at this. If you want a flavour of the original series, I dare say Charlie's right. If you literally just want to prepare for the forthcoming films, obviously Spacey has a direct link. So then we move on to the next heavyweight series in the saga, the cartoon from the early 70s.
This is also on Netflix, I think, which is quite good. So if you're like me, you're a fan of animation.
If you're a fan of animation, this ain't the show for you.
Avoid it like the plague.
This was made by Filmation, who were probably best known to our generation for He-Man.
Yeah.
And they were
I was trying to think, where do I recognise that style of animation? He-Man, that's it.
And the thing is, so you've got eyes, apart from the pupils, the same colour as the rest of the skin.
Yeah.
And you've got, they'll talk and literally their head will move once or their eyes will move.
Everything else is static, but this
it ran for 22 episodes of about half the length of the full series. But it had most of the cast working on it.
A lot of the script is also quite exposition heavy. There's a lot of Basil exposition going on, which I struggle with a lot of the time. But otherwise, it's interesting. And
it put a few things into canon. Tiberius, as his middle name. We had James T. Kirk, but it was never put in canon what it was. In fact, he's James R. Kirk in Where No Man Has Gone.
The Menagerie. Yeah, see, I was like, why is James R. not James T?
And then the other thing is we've got Christopher Pike as captain for a while. The very last episode of the animated series is called The Counterclock Incident, which is kind of a reverse of the Deadly Years. That's a TOS episode where they all get older, and only Shatner's hairline comes forward. But there you go. Everyone else gets older. He gets more hair. But yeah, they get old. Well, in this, they get younger. But it's a retirement. They're taking the first captain of the Enterprise on a sort of retirement journey. Robert April, who's turning 75 and retiring. So that puts into the timeline that effectively, if you take it as canon, that Kirk was the third captain of the Enterprise. It's okay. You do have people like DC Fontana writing episodes, and she wrote episodes for the original series. But the animation is extremely cheap and a little bit off-putting.
Yeah, I think that's the unfortunate thing, because I think there are some really nice episodes in there. There's one that could vaguely be important or tie in, which is one called Yesteryear, about the earlier years of Spock when he lived on Vulcan, which basically involves Spock going back in time to see his younger self and helping him out. And there's another one I really enjoy called Albatross, which is basically about Dr. McCoy being arrested by an alien race because of supposedly he created a virus or something that kind of wiped out a lot of people there and responsible for a lot of people dead. And it's kind of, that was a really interesting episode, especially for a cartoon. And it was nice that even though this was animated and put towards a younger audience, that it still kind of managed to kind of keep some of the themes of Star Trek, certainly potentially more than some of the later media.
Yeah, I think that might be a clue as to why it didn't have that long a run. Because it's a cartoon on a Saturday morning that really is over the head of a lot of kids. But it's not bad. It's worth checking out if you can get past the animation. So that was the 70s. Obviously, we're going to skip the films or the start of the films now, because obviously TOS is relevant because there's 6 films with that crew. So yeah, obviously the TOS is vital because it's the original Star Trek, and also half of the films we're going to look at have all or most of this crew. 4 of the films have the Next Generation crew. So Star Trek The Next Generation, I guess certainly Becca and Chris, you've seen more of this.
I would want to say in passing, where it's been on like, TV like after school, but again, I never really watched it, just because it wasn't my thing. So I can't really. I mean, I'm more familiar with it as a show, but I couldn't tell you what happens in any episode at all. Like, if that makes sense. So I'm not. I can never say I've sat down and watched an episode.
That's going to be interesting. We've got a few of those to go through that we can maybe give you some hints to watch before we get to the actual films. But again, I would say we'll talk about it maybe when we get to the films in a little while. But certainly, I think the characters are less well served by the films than perhaps the original crew are. Becca, what's your memories of The Next Generation and your knowledge of it?
Yeah, I probably have seen quite a few. I think when I come. What I'm going to do, my plan is obviously work our way through the original series films, and then when it comes to it, I'll watch the relevant episodes for the Next Generation films. But I think I'll come to them again, and I'll be like, oh yeah, I have seen this one, I have seen that, and it'll come back to me. So I'm probably a bit more familiar with the Next Generation than I am with the original series. I probably have seen them, but again, it's been several years, so I'm looking forward to seeing them again. Was it something you enjoyed? Yeah, definitely. I think. Well, Patrick Stewart's a legend in whatever he does, and the fact that I think he's sort of more famous now, certainly within within popular culture, just he's really game and he's really up for it, like parodying sort of the typical roles that he would usually have.
My favourite when he's on extras.
Yeah, literally classic, up for a laugh. Really, really game.
Honestly, if he was around now, before you get your nicks back on, he'd seen everything.
I just thought how random that joke was. It just it doesn't seem to make any sense. Like, he's just completely out of nowhere.
It's hilarious. He's ready to play against type as well. I think that's just he's sending up all these brilliant roles that he's played, and obviously he's sort of like theatre. He comes from the theatre background as well, doesn't he? So, what's the word I'm looking for? Thespian. That's the word. But I'm probably more familiar with that, and I think I enjoy it a bit more as well. It's more relatable. But that's not to say that the original series is bad by any means, but it's not.
This is your Star Trek.
But yeah, it's kind of the one that you sort of grew up with, that I'm more familiar with.
This is my Star Trek too, and I think that That's largely because that's not necessarily going to translate to when we talk about the films. I love TOS, I really do. If I love both of these series, certainly more than anything we're going to talk about afterwards. I think Patrick Stewart is my gateway drug. I think I've got a bit of... he's my Robert Darby, Chris. Yeah. So I've got a bit of a man crush on. Yeah, definitely.
It's the bald head, isn't it?
But he is what I think a captain should be. That doesn't mean Kirk isn't, and I think we'll talk about this, particularly when we get to the reboots, that a lot of the popular culture drawing of Kirk is a bit of a parody of what he actually is. And certainly they're almost mirrors of each other in that Patrick Stewart, and we'll come to it in an episode I'm going to talk about in a minute, was a bit of a Jack the Lad at the academy and a natural talent. But becomes a very serious man as a captain. And Kirk is kind of the reverse, but not literally, in that he doesn't become a clown, but he becomes much more willing to break the rules, where he was very studious at university. And again, we'll talk about it both in The Wrath of Khan and in the reboot, the J.J. Abrams film, because the way they characterize the Kobayashi Maru is, I don't think, what Kirk would have been at that point. But we'll get to that. Certainly, though, my general impressions on it, and we'll come to some episodes with me after Charlie tells us a little bit about his experiences with TNG, but I think the crew on the TV show are better served than the original series, in that, I know, Chris, you said that, it's a stronger crew, and maybe it's a more iconic crew, in that Sulu has a greater pop culture awareness than perhaps Troy, but at the same time, the Next Generation was much more of an ensemble across 7 of them instead of 3 of them. I
just think you got, who've you got? I mean, there's nothing necessarily wrong with them. You have Riker, who's okay, but, he's not exactly, rebel, type of, dashing hero, and he's kind of...
No, he's chief of staff, really. Although he is a bit of a womanizer, he is supposed to be the Kirk of this crew.
Yeah.
Worf has obviously been in more episodes of Star Trek than any other character.
Yeah, I would say the best characters outside of Picard is either Data or Worf.
Data's as iconic, or almost as iconic as Spock. I'm probably not as, because I think Spock would have more name recognition. But certainly, you do get Data episodes, you do get Worf episodes, you even get the odd Troy episode, or Dr. Crusher, much more than the original series, which was about those 3, and specifically, so many episodes end with Kirk having a fight. So I do think they spread the load better, but I think when we get to the films, I think I don't know if it's name recognition or whatever, but...
They're not quite cinematic, are they?
Yeah, possibly that's it. I don't really want to see the Next Generation rebooted, but I do love it, and I think I'll talk about what I love through the episodes I talk about. Charlie, I think it's easy for me, as someone who's got the original Enterprise tattooed on him and is very much a Kirk guy and all the rest of it, to assume you don't like TNG, but that's not quite the case, is it?
No, my memory of TNG, the earliest memory, is nearly giving myself first-degree burns because I dropped a cup of tea on my leg after getting so excited at seeing an advert for it on BBC Two when it was about to come on. I'm a big fan of TNG, as much a fan of it as TOS, but that's
more about
goes without saying. Yeah, absolutely. And I think
but I've read people, Charlie, who literally cannot understand how somebody would prefer Picard. And I don't think you're quite in that camp. I think you could understand why people might prefer TNG.
Oh, absolutely. And I think certainly, Picard is a wonderful captain, and the way his character was drawn up and developed, and certainly the way Patrick Stewart has inhabited it, is such a sheer part of the huge success of Next Generation, and how it's kind of sat in the canon of Star Trek. Yeah, he's a very different captain, and certainly there's a lot more kind of age there. But like you said, there's some stuff that's come from behind the scenes that we find out in episodes like the one you're going to talk about, which I know exactly what you mean, even from forgetting the list you gave us. That we know what's come before, and we see the kind of storied history from that.
Yeah.
But kind of Picard's intelligence and Picard's less reliant on other people than he is himself.
Yeah.
Whereas with Kirk, you had the three. You don't have that in Next Generation.
No, but having said that, the way the Next Generation episodes tend to be structured, he does have a lot more sort of conferences.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, because, like you said, because it ran for 7 seasons, there was a lot more ability to explore the facets of the crew, not only just the main crew, but also the kind of peripheral ones as well. And also, and one of the things I really, really love about it, and I certainly love about DS9 as well, is the way it kind of expanded Star Trek in such a huge way. And
yeah, the Enterprise in the original series feels a much more lonely ship than TNG. TNG, they always seem to be going to meet somebody.
Yeah, and absolutely, and the Enterprise, the Galaxy class, the 1701D as they call it, is a ship that's got families, and it's a gigantic ship, and it's got a load of families and all different crew members from all walks of life, and everyone's kind of doing all kind of different things on there. So from that ship alone, you get to see, like with Worf as well, you get to learn a lot more about the Klingons, and they go from the kind of the warrior race that we originally were shown them to be, especially in terms of how they interact with the Federation. You learn a lot more about the Romulans, and there's the Cardassians, and certainly the Vulcans as well, and also Data as well, going through him and his journey. I mean, like, it's really funny that Spock's modus operandi is to suppress his emotion, whereas Data is very much wanting emotion, wanting to be what Spock rejects.
There's a scene in an episode I'm going to mention in a while that covers exactly that point. They are analog. He is an analog of Spock, and we do get a bit more of that as we go to some of the later series where they go a bit greatest hits.
Yeah.
But at this stage, he's just different enough, and Brent Spiner's fantastic in the part.
Absolutely.
It's one of the biggest disappointments of the films, but we'll come to it.
Yeah, I certainly can't fault the actors. I mean, I kind of agree that all of the characters are maybe not not some people I find that interesting, but I like the interaction. I like Councillor Troy's role.
Strangely dates the show because she sounds
absolutely, because it's a real kind of 80s concept.
Not that there's a counsellor on the ship. I think we might expect that in a workplace now.
Something that we'd all need, but I suppose with her abilities and her empathetic abilities, but also there's a lot of episodes that seem like filler to me. But there's a lot of episodes that are amazing. I think one thing I can say for the Next Generation, rather than for the original series, there are certainly episodes in the Next Generation that are all better than the films they made. Whereas I don't think I could say that for the original series.
I think my favourite original crew stuff tends to be some of the films. As much as I like the series, that might be the dated element to it. That just the whole way things were written and produced changed a lot. I mean, you didn't have overlapping dialogue in those days. The camera would point at someone, he'd say something, you'd get the reverse shot of somebody else, they'd say something, and it was kind of a lot more like a play.
Yeah, so I think mainly my love of Next Generation comes from expanding the universe and Picard as a character.
The Federation is a big place at this point, and the Klingon. Those of you who maybe haven't watched a lot of Star Trek, but have watched the remake of Battlestar Galactica. Battlestar Galactica, the showrunner and writer of most of that was Ronald D. Moore. He was a writer on The Next Generation, and he did most of the Klingon episodes. So he's responsible for most of that lore. I'm just going to name some episodes now that I just think are a bit of a background. Now, it's a bit less important, but almost more important, in that the characters, because they had longer, are better drawn in The Next Generation. I'm not saying they're better characters, but I could sit and tell you more about Troy than I could tell you about Sulu, based on what we saw in the TV show.
I think TNG just came at the right time to do Star Trek justice, really. Because I think because back then they didn't really have the budget. Everything was still a little bit campy, a bit ropey.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I think it was. I think Next Generation probably wouldn't get off the ground had the original series existed. So I think it still needed Kirk. It still needed the old show, but. By that time, it came to was it late 80s?
87 to 94 this ran.
Yeah.
So by that time...
We didn't get it here till about 90, but yeah.
They had like a certain more maturity, there was more respect for the series, because they knew there was an absolute fan base there. And they had like more of a budget, they had a bit more of a sensibility to it.
And also, we'll talk about this during the films, but Roddenberry's influence started to wane after the first couple of years. And as important as he is to Star Trek, and there's accuracy in the phrase Roddenberry's vision, because, you know, the working together and all the things we've talked about during Charlie's choice of episodes. But at the same time, it's one of those phrases I'd happily never hear again, because he's talked about, like, he's this unimpeachable fucking god. And the fact is, he was a nightmare to work with. He had a lot of ideas that didn't really work in terms of how you tell drama. And most of the best films have nothing to do with him. Most of the best TNG has nothing to do with him.
So what was Roddenberry's vision like? How did that contradict the Trek that we know now?
It's not so much that it contradicted it. It's that... certainly Roddenberry would never have written Deep Space Nine. No. And we'll come to Deep Space Nine in a while. But he didn't really believe in conflict between crew members.
Yeah.
And they struggled to get... When Roddenberry was still around, there are episodes I could point to. I don't think there were any in this list. But there are episodes that they went to him with the script and he'd kick it out, saying no, because they're arguing with each other. And
because no, they don't argue with each other these days.
But that's how drama works.
Yeah, that is drama at the sense of it.
And a lot of the early episodes, all the twee Wesley stuff, well... Wesley Crusher's a young boy on the crew who's about 15 when the show starts, and he saves the ship every week, and he's like working on the bridge, and it's pathetic, and it's a bad idea, and I feel sorry for Will Wheaton, actually, because he was so young, and he's quite cool now, actually, Will Wheaton.
He's a bit of a legend.
Yeah, but the thing is, Gene Roddenberry's middle name is Wesley. It was a bit of personal, like, wish fulfillment in there. The motion picture is a film we'll talk about in a few weeks' time. And I'm not going to say anything particularly bad about it, particularly. And I know Charlie's fond of it, but it's very self-serious. And I think Roddenberry was very self-serious in a lot of ways. And I just think he was great for setting up the universe, but a lot of the best stuff doesn't involve him.
It sounds to me how it was like he had a good idea, but I think his failing was that he doesn't collaborate with people, because I think he had his idea, and it was like, oh, no, you can't touch that idea, rather than working with people, which kind of contradicts his whole vision anyway. It's all like, oh, we're working together. No, it's mine!
And when
Get off, it's mine.
Some of the best episodes in the first series, and Charlie knows the original series better than I do, but Gene Coon, Charlie? Gene Coon, vital in some of the very best episodes, burnt out after like half a season, or a season and a half, or whatever it was.
I think Roddenberry was very much like George Lucas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That he had the ideas there, but when his vision went unfiltered, then you don't always get his Star Trek, his vision of Star Trek was very kind of utopian, and like you said, without conflict and without money and things like that, which is kind of weirdly contradicted later on. I know. There's bits where it contradicts itself.
It does. It's not very consistent with Star.
No. But
it tries.
The kind of what people think about now as the ethos of Star Trek is kind of a mix between Roddenberry's early kind of ideas, what became of what the TOS was, and then what became of what TNG was, really kind of a mix of it all. It all started back then with the original series, but like Dave said, Roddenberry is certainly the originator, but where you have, for instance, The Empire Strikes Back, where you have people taking George Lucas's material and elevating it. It's the only thing with Roddenberry is that he tried to do his best to take as much of the credit as possible, even going to the point where he exercised a clause in the contract for the music. It was Alexander Courage who wrote the music for the main title for Star Trek.
The legendary composer of Superman 4, The Quest for Peace.
Exactly. Although that is a good score, and
yeah, I know
Alexander Courage.
Yeah,
he worked a lot with Jerry Goldsmith and John Williams as an orchestrator. Because Superman 4 has several themes written by John Williams that were given by him to Courage, but that's another thing entirely. But what happened is that Courage signed his contract, and then Roddenberry activated a clause which basically says that any royalties from that go to him for 50%. Go to anyone. 50% of them go to anyone who wrote lyrics. So what happened is Roddenberry wrote lyrics for the Star Trek theme. They were never officially recorded, and there was never any version originally that went out with the lyrics on. But because he had written those lyrics, he was down as the co-composer of the Star Trek theme, and because of that, got half of the royalties from it.
That's cheeky, isn't it?
Well, there's going to be plenty to say about Roddenberry when we get to the motion picture and the Wrath of Khan, because the motion picture is very much his. Wrath of Khan very much isn't, but there's a whole story leading to the making of the motion picture, and that will tell us. We'll talk a bit more about Roddenberry there. Just to run through some next gen episodes that might be of interest to people, though. Some of them I've chosen just as there's a run of a few of them that I think are relevant to the films, and I'll just go through them. Nothing from the first series, because the first series is crap. The second series coincided with a writer's strike. You've got episodes there that are repurposed. There's one called The Child, which is the opening episode of that series, and it was actually written for Star Trek Phase 2, which is a concept we'll talk about next week. I'll explain what that was, but it wasn't even written for this crew. But there was a couple of episodes in this series that are very key to what this show is. The first one I'm going to name is The Measure of a Man. The Measure of a Man is all about Data's right to choose, about Data's status, i.e. as a sentient being, because he's an android, and also his right to choose. Is he property? Is he the property of Starfleet? And it comes down to a very shrunken down court case where Picard and Riker are instructed to be on opposite sides of each other. Riker doesn't want to be, because they want to do some guy wants to dismantle Data to run some tests on him to create more like him. Charlie, what did you make of this episode?
It's one of the best, absolutely. It's nice because it comes kind of early in the second season. So you've had the first season where people it's just kind of universally known as something to kind of forget. And then you have episodes like this, which, again, go back to the reality and the philosophy of Star Trek as a really kind of hard science fiction show sometimes. And going back to be able to having these big ideas about people and about things like androids, people like androids, how they fit into the Star Trek universe, how they're seen and how other people are seen, and certainly allegorical in terms of
slavery.
Yeah, exactly.
It's also the importance of this episode to the films is very slight. I mean, had there been a Data type character in the TOS, this could have been a TOS episode in much the same way that Balance of Terror could have been a TNG episode. Yeah. This is, for all I've just said about Roddenberry, this feels like a Roddenberry idea. Whether it is, I'm not sure, but it certainly feels like an idea. The films are very heavy either in main A plot or B plot on Data, because Data was so popular. So I think things that revolve around him are useful. This tells you a bit as a viewer, if you've never watched TNG, what Data is, what the issues are around him, and how the writers sort of cheat a little bit on his feelings, because he does feel sort of. But it's a terrific episode. It won a Hugo Award. Patrick Stewart's fantastic in it. Everyone's fantastic in it, actually, and it's one of the few early episodes that I would recommend.
And also showed Picard's kind of slight womanizing
from his younger days.
Yeah.
Because he meets someone that he has undoubtedly had. But it's only a small part. It's almost I don't know. It's only a small part. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sure it's a huge part.
Massive.
But it's only a small part of the show.
I have to get him on the show. I have to tweet him as well.
What, to come on and describe how big his part is? Okay, fair enough. Have either of you seen this?
Probably somewhere along the line. I'm pretty sure I have vague memories of it, but no, it's quite good. So obviously, following on from Star Trek, just to kind of divert, obviously, Red Dwarf was another big sci-fi kind of show I grew up with in the 90s. And obviously the character of Crichton is the same sort of thing, isn't it? Sort of android, wanting to break free of his programming and develop all these humanoid emotions. But no, I think I do remember this one from Trek, and it is really well written, actually. I enjoyed it quite a lot, and it's you've got a lot of ideas surrounding like laws of robotics and that as well, which I think is really interesting. But yeah, this one I vaguely remember. Some of them I do, some of them I don't, but this one I definitely, yeah.
When Star Trek gets it right, it's entertaining. When it gets it wrong, it's heavy-handed and preachy. And this is very much the former. The second Next Generation film is about creatures called the Borg. It's a collective hive consciousness. Now, by the time the film came along, they'd been a bit defanged in a lot of ways. But when they first came along, this was some of the tensest TV I'd ever seen, because they just looked unbeatable. The first episode is called Q Who. This is the second season episode, and you're going to have to give it a bit of a pass because I haven't named any previous Q episodes. Q is kind of an omnipresent, omnipotent being from a species that are the same. They can be anywhere.
Does he have any gadgets?
He doesn't have any gadgets, no.
He still Bond's mission before the show. Go on.
Yeah, he
Pay
does.
attention to 007.
Yeah, he does. He keeps telling off, enough of the womanizing, Picard, No, so Q...
Bring it back in pristine condition.
But this is like his third or fourth appearance by the time we get to this episode.
It's not like Q, really.
Just give it that pass that you're going to see this omnipotent being who can put people anywhere, play tricks on them, all that sort of thing. Q wants to join the Enterprise, and again, that is partly dealt with in a previous episode. Again, give it that pass. The key point is, though, that he flings them into another quadrant of the galaxy. It would take them years to get home. I think it's something like 25 years to get home. They're actually in the Delta Quadrant, where Voyager later is set. And they encounter this cube full of these drones that can adapt to any weapon you've got and will assimilate you into their hive. And frankly, they just look unbeatable. They kill several of the crew. And eventually, the only way they're saved is Q gets what he wants to hear from Picard and sends them home. So we've been introduced to this being that we know is going to be unbelievably difficult to beat. A season and a half later, it's the season 3 closer and the season 4 opener. You've got the best of both worlds. The best of both worlds is better than the Borg film by some distance. It's brilliant. And it actually is like the rematch with the Borg. And I'm not going to say too much more about it here, but this and the next episode, this episode is particularly key to being introduced to this particular antagonist. Something happens to Picard that's very, very key, but it's also, at this point, they look unbeatable. So it's really tense. And not only that, it goes across the end of one season and the beginning of the next. And there were rumours about Patrick Stewart's contract. So there are things that happen in the show that you think, shit, he might actually die. Now, the fact that they go on for another few years in films, obviously he didn't. But we genuinely thought, how the fuck are they going to get out of this? And the second half of the show is not as good as the first, frankly, because you've set up something you can't really resolve easily. But it's fantastic TV, still amongst my favourite Star Trek. And the very next episode is called Family. They're on sort of shore leave back on Earth because the Enterprise has taken a bit of a kicking, so it's having refits. And Picard goes home to Le Bar, France, because Picard, despite sounding like an Englishman, is French. And he meets his long estranged brother and his son, Rene. Now, that's relevant for generations. When we get to the first film, those characters recur there. and also all the Borg stuff is relevant to for the film that follows. But this film deals with the effect on Picard of what's happened to him and his crew in the previous episodes. And you'd be wise, in terms of enjoying First Contact, to ignore anything afterwards in terms of the Borg and just take it from there. But Family just sees a man stripped down to his core. Charlie, that run of episodes, your thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, Q-Who is great because, the Borg are terrifying. We're used to the Klingons, the Romulans, which are these very kind of angry, emotional races, very much like a reflection of humanity. But the Borg come along, and obviously this is very important, is that they were all one. There's the Borg collective. And the fact that they're all acting as one, they're all linked through this hive mind. So this like a hub. So they all have the same information instantly. So when they adapt to kind of weapons and things like that, they can all do it instantly. And what they do to the ship, I mean, there's the famous bit for me in Q-Who is always a bit where they just carve a slice out of the deck of the Enterprise's primary hull, the saucer section,
and lift it out, and it's several decks.
And it's terrifying, the power they have. And then when the best of both worlds comes along, and it's kind of the inevitability that they had all kind of been thinking about, where the Borg have finally reached Federation space and are going straight for Earth, and dealing with that, and how the crew deals with that, how Picard deals with that, and how they deal with fighting this collective. And basically, it's all about the human individuality and the human spirit versus the hive mind, and how that plays out. And again, part of the Star Trek philosophy of humanity elevating itself and bettering itself, which is something that is completely fucked over when you get to First Contact, which is just an unfortunate byproduct of the Wrath of Khan effect. But then you get Family, which is a beautiful episode, because it's just all about reflection. And like we said earlier, where TNG gets 7 seasons and TOS gets 3, you're able to have these episodes. You don't just go straight to the next mission. You're able to have these episodes where you see the psychological effect that these kind of events, I mean, especially what Picard goes through in the Best of Both Worlds. And going from that, and the family he's got on the Enterprise versus his actual family that, like Dave said, he's estranged from. You've got Robert, his brother, and his nephew Renee, and the relationship that kind of goes from that. And it's just a beautifully written episode, and is again so much of what Star Trek is about beyond spaceship battles and action and things like that.
I've seen him in First Contact, but I was aware that they are like the main show baddies. I mean, I understand they're essentially like a dark, twisted version of what the Enterprise, not Enterprise, the Federation actually is, in terms of like bringing everyone together, but rather like assimilating them to act
in the
as
worst
one.
kind of way.
Yeah,
I think if you watch nothing else from my list, Charlie's right on Family. But obviously, you could take First Contact as the aftermath if you liked. So I would watch Q-Who in the Best of Both Worlds before anything else on the list, because it's directly relevant to one film. But if you throw in Family as well, that's relevant to another film. The next one I've named is Unification. I'm cheating a bit with these because 3 of mine are 2-parters. Unification is relevant, believe it or not only to Nemesis, where we get a bit more about Romulus and the Romulans and the Remans, but also it's relevant to the reboot, because this double episode has Spock in it. Spock is a Vulcan. They live a lot longer than humans, so he's an older gentleman by this point, but far from ancient, years later. So he's around in the TNG timeline, and he's working sort of undercover on Romulus. And that's all I'm really going to say about it, but it's relevant when we come to the reboot. It's relevant to learning a bit more about relations with between Romulus and the Romulans and the Federation, and also any excuse to see Spock again. And also there is a scene between Spock and Data, which does highlight the differences between them. He's chosen Vulcan logic, so he's chosen to suppress his human side, whereas Data's biggest wish in the world is to be human. He's Pinocchio. So great episode, a good double episode. I don't think it's great, but I think it's useful to watch it. I certainly think the next two I'm going to name are great episodes. The Inner Light is the next episode. This is Patrick Stewart's favourite episode. The Enterprise sees a sort of derelict craft stroke, but it's more of a beacon in space. It makes contact with Picard and knocks him out. And he wakes up on a planet as a guy called Cayman, and he's got a wife, and you've lost your memory. And we don't find out for a while, but we do find out fairly early in the episode that it's effectively hallucination. He's still on the ship, but you see him live an entire life on this planet as another guy, and he starts off wanting to find his ship and wondering where it was and swearing blind it was real. And over time, he has a family, the one thing Picard never really gets in the show. And it's a dying race's way of passing on their story because there's a drought. And they're using Picard to pass on their story. And it's a beautiful episode. And occasionally you'll see Picard I think you might even see it in Generations. He picks up a flute, and he got it from this race.
Yeah. I think possibly if you were to poll most fans of Next Generation, which is their favourite episode, it would be this one. And it's certainly a wonderful, wonderful episode, and absolutely heartbreaking, really. Something that Star Trek is great at doing, where examining the lives of the crew and examining Picard and his lack of family and what it's like to be the captain, the father of that spaceship all the time without ever really having that life.
Again, when you take the caricatures of the two captains, if you like, Kirk's all piss and vinegar, and Picard's like, this stoic kind of cold, uptight Englishman. French as a character, but he's played as but he is an Englishman.
He's more by the book, isn't he? Whereas
born in France but raised in England.
Well, kind of, if
that's
you
the
like.
one.
Well, no, but obviously, but I mean, they do still. When he says shit, he says maid as well in the show and stuff like that. But
French heritage coming through.
As I say,
that's probably like a cheeky excuse to slip in some swearing there.
Yeah.
Get past the censors.
Tapestry is a season 7 episode, I think, or season 6 is one of the two. I think it's very late in the 6th series, actually. It's another Q episode. Picard has a artificial heart. He's got a sort of an electric heart, if you like, or a mechanical heart, rather. And it's because when he was at the academy, he got into a fight with a group called the Nausicans, who are just basically another violent warrior race, and he got stabbed through his original heart, and he was saved and all the rest of it. Well, he gets the chance to undo that mistake, and you see what Picard would have been without being that person at the academy. And I just think it's a useful episode for showing that not only is it a very good episode, but it actually shows that he is a man of passion, and he is a man of discipline. A bit like Spock suppressing his emotions. He has matured past much of this, but a lot of it was realizing he had to sort of calm that side of himself down if he wanted to A, survive, and B, thrive in the Federation. So I just think it's a terrific episode for a bit of background on Picard.
Which is the episode where with Picard with the 4 lights.
That's a double episode called Chain of Command, which I didn't think to put in here actually, but again, you can't watch everything. There's 178 episodes of The Next Generation, so it's what do you pick?
Yeah.
Certainly in terms of an acting performance, it's amazing because he's tortured during that.
Yeah.
That's season 6 as
Terrifying.
well. And that's good background on the Cardassians, but the Cardassians aren't really in any of the films, so
No.
I left it out. The final one I named is the final double episode, All Good Things, which I only watched myself yesterday, I think.
I think I remember this one as well.
I'm not going to say very much about it. It's a double episode. I only pick it because it tells us where we leave this crew before we pick them up a few months later in the films.
I love All Good Things. I think it's fantastic. It's not only a great ending to the series, but again, it's an expansion of showing what Star Trek really is, and the idea of kind of elevating yourself and bettering yourself and furthering humanity for that. And the kind of, again, the scenes between Q and Picard are just extraordinary. And certainly at the end, when Picard kind of sees things in a certain clarity in terms of having to resolve things, is just brilliant writing. And it's miles better than any of the films.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the way it leaves that crew, there's a little bit of development because we've talked about Picard distancing himself from people, and he was liked and respected. I mean, he would probably call himself friends with some of his crew, but he has to keep a distance. And by the end, we're starting to see that just break down a touch with his senior crew, and it's a nice place to leave it. So those are the two key series to look at bits of if you do want to do anything, because all the films are based on those two crews. But obviously there are other series.
So yeah, we can discuss a little bit about the series following up from that. So you've got Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. I'm a bit fastidious, so let's go through them one by one. So you've got Deep Space Nine, which is from 93 to 1999. Oh my god, I feel old. Yeah, this also around for 7 series. It was kind of set, obviously, on a space station, Deep Space Nine, rather than on a spaceship. And again, it was very different from 2 previous series because it was more kind of serialized rather than Monster of the Week or Issue of the Week. But have you guys seen this? What do you reckon to it? I've seen 1 or 2 episodes, but these 3 series, I must admit, I'm very weak on. I've seen hardly any, a few episodes here and there. But how about yourselves?
Is Deep Space Nine set at the same time as Next Gen?
It overlaps.
Yeah, just literally the few years after it. I think they all kind of follow on from each other, don't they? Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and then Enterprise, which is the prequel, I guess.
They'd actually they'd standardised star dates by that point, so you can actually tell where you are by the star date in time. And yeah, they all overlap or follow on from each other. Not Enterprise, obviously.
Yeah, because all the series. I don't know about Enterprise, but Deep Space Nine and Voyager were introduced with elements of the previous series. So the Voyager starts aboard Deep Space Nine, and you see Quark, the Ferengi bartender, and people like that. But the Deep Space Nine actually has a much deeper kind of role, and actually begins at the Battle of Wolf 359, which is a battle that we see the aftermath of in the Best of Both Worlds. There's basically where the Borg has been smashing its way through all the Federation fleet to get to Earth in that episode. One of the ships that it fights at Wolf 359 is a ship called the USS Saratoga, and the second in command on that ship, who eventually takes it over before it going, is Commander Sisko. And then he is eventually given the OK or the assignment to go and be the commander of Deep Space Nine.
His wife dies on that ship.
Exactly. His wife, he lives with his wife and son, and he has to leave his wife behind as she dies on that ship. Now, because of that, see what's happened, there is a very clear line between him and Picard and how he sees Picard because of what Picard was in that episode and what those actions were as an indirect result of Picard. And that gives it a really interesting start. I'm a huge fan of DS9, and in terms of if I'm ranking the series, it would come after TOS for me. The thing with Deep Space Nine, like the Next Generation, it took a bit of a while to get going, and also because it's so different than any other series. It's not about going out and exploring in a spaceship. It's about people coming to this station from all sorts of places and exploring them from there. So you're stuck here on this station. Deep Space Nine is what used to be a Cardassian station, and basically it was built in orbit of the planet Bajor when the Cardassians occupied Bajor. So when the Bajorans' occupation, when the Cardassian occupation of Bajor ended, the station was abandoned and was taken over by the Federation to have a foothold in that area and to be able to help Bajor sort it out. So you've got a mix of Federation and Bajoran officers and people on the ship, and the Bajorans as well are a very, very religious race, and there's a lot of religious aspects that come into this show that are actually really, really cleverly kept in right to the end of the show. So all through those 7 seasons, it does take a bit of time to get going, and it certainly, well, like Dave said earlier, Roddenberry would hate it because there is so much conflict between these characters, because the Bajorans and the Federations don't necessarily trust each other. Bajorans don't want them there. So all these new characters, all these people coming together, and there's just conflict all the time. There's money involved. These characters are not the thing with the Next Generation is the characters were, some of them maybe quite squeaky clean, whereas that's certainly not the case here. Basically, it wasn't until the end of the 2nd season where they introduced a race called the Dominion. And the Dominion, basically, one of the reasons Deep Space Nine is where it is because a wormhole is discovered that takes it from the Alpha Quadrant to the Gamma Quadrant. A lot of the kind of exploring that they do is they can go on the little shuttles they've got, and they go through the wormhole and find places in the Gamma Quadrant. Now, there's a race called the Dominion who don't like that they're doing this. So basically, what they do is they start capturing Federation ships and that kind of thing that have come in, and eventually we meet them in this episode called the Jem'Hadar, which is the finale of the 2nd season. And the Jem'Hadar are basically genetically engineered shock troopers, very violent, very, very good at what they do, which is killing people, and very arrogant. And they're just absolutely vicious, and there to carry out the Dominion's orders. And basically, this is just explored in one of the later episodes, called Hippocratic Oath, is that the Dominion control them through a drug. So basically, they have them hooked on drugs from birth, and then they control them with them. So if they get out of line, they withdraw this drug from them. And it's kind of this horrible way they control them that we actually see these vicious people, and we see kind of like a sympathetic side to them. But anyway, but this whole thing and the introduction of the Jem'Hadar begins an arc that starts from season 3 to season 7 of absolute war, which is something Star Trek it does the whole spaceship battle thing, and we have it as kind of action interludes, but this is full on all out war between the Federation and the Dominion and the Cardassians and the Romulans and the Klingons, and all of the things, the politics and the interpersonal relationships that go between them. And it's just the way that arc is just played out.
Because you've got shapeshifters, nobody trusts anybody.
Exactly.
And you've also got Cardassians on the station with the race they want subjugated.
Yeah.
So everywhere you look, there is complete massive distrust.
Yeah. And there's lots of scenes where people kind of have their blood tests and things like that to make sure they aren't shapeshifters. And it's very much about trust. And there's some really harrowing scenes where Captain Sisko has to blood test his own father to make sure that he's not a changeling. And it's a really, really harrowing scene. And again, really kind of nails home this sense of distrust and what has been engineered by the Dominion, who I guess, took over from the Borg as being the all-powerful race. And there's a few kind of beautiful, just pure science fiction episodes. There's one called The Visitor, where
which I cry at.
Yeah,
it is a really good series. It's not that relevant for what we're about to cover, but it's totally worth investigation.
Yeah,
it sounds like a lot of it's still relevant for our times as well. Obviously, written some years ago now.
Much, but I mean, you can see the genesis of where TV's gone, because it finishes like a couple of years before like 24 came along.
Yeah,
and you've got arcs, you've got suicide bombers, you've got all sorts of, and that creeping distrust everyone's got that TV hadn't done before this point.
No, it's really groundbreaking.
And there's another one amazing episode, which is probably my favourite, which is one called Far Beyond the Stars, which is basically where it has a kind of, I think Sisko maybe hits his head or something like that. I can't remember how it goes through it, but it's set in Earth in the 1950s, and it has Captain Sisko, who is black, as a science fiction writer, and all the crew are in kind of like, it's like the Wizard of Oz. All the crew are in different roles in this little area, in kind of where the kind of, there was all the kind of racial issues back then. I say all the racial issues back then, we've still got them now, so this is still completely relevant, where you have women. For instance, DC Fontana, who Dave mentioned earlier, is a very important writer. Her name is Dorothy Fontana, but she had to put her name as DC Fontana because she was a woman, so she had to put her initials in.
Because a woman should be less believable kind of at the time.
She just wouldn't have got there.
No, exactly. Which is a shame, but that's how it was.
And this is all about this writer that creates Deep Space Nine as this story for this little pulp sci-fi magazine, and it not being run because he's black, and all of the racial issues from that, and his frustration of that. And it's a beautiful, beautiful episode.
Following on from Deep Space Nine, and in fact, again, cross-cutting, about a third of the way through, Voyager started.
Yeah, do you guys feel the same way about this?
Voyager's shite.
Speaking as an outsider, I think by the time we get to Voyager, I think it's just come a bit tired. I mean, I think we've had ever since Next Gen came along, and then obviously
they got progressively less popular as well.
Yeah,
they did.
I think it was just a bit overkill. It's like, more. So I like the diversity we've had in the captains. Like, we start off with Kirk, and then we've gone something different with Picard, and now we've had even sort of more racial. So obviously, I'm sure Sisko's like a lot more interesting character than the fact that he's a black guy. But you have got like a black captain, and you got a female captain. Now I can't really tell you much about them as characters, but there is some sort of progressiveness in the series there.
I'll talk about Voyager for a bit then. The problem with Voyager is, firstly, the crew are kind of like a greatest hits crew. So, you've got the sort of, you've got a Vulcan there. He doesn't play it too badly, but, you've got that. And when you look at the crew, you've got the rebellious one who's meant to be sort of the Kirk stroke Riker of this crew, but he's not, really. The captain, well, she plays the role very well, but the extent of her characterization is she likes coffee. That's about it. They don't do a lot with her. And then a lot of the problem then after is it pisses away its premise. And its premise is brilliant. Because they get slung across the galaxy. And at maximum warp, it would take them 75 years to get home. So they've got no Federation around them. They've got no support. They've got none of the... And every race they encounter... certainly in the early going, they don't know. So it's not like, they're allies, they're not. It really could have been an attempt to almost reimagine the original series for a new generation. And also, Deep Space Nine, and a little bit The Next Generation, but not so much, took ages setting up the Maquis. And the Maquis are kind of almost like a terrorist cell, really. But again, like everything else in this world, it's a point of view, and it's basically all to do with the peace between Cardassia and the Bajorans and all the rest of it. They set this up, and the Maquis are like a group of rebels with their own ships and fleets and everything else. Voyager is made up half and half of the two crews, so there should be a ton of conflict there from two vastly different ideologies, and also a lot of people who've already rejected the Federation. You're away from the Federation, so you should be in the situation where, by the second day, there should be crew members going, I ain't wearing the fucking uniform, what, are you going to make me do it? They do make noises about supplies, but frankly, they should have real supply problems. And perhaps certain races on the ship could only eat certain foods they don't have, or something like that. And it pisses away its premise entirely. They get right there and they're immediate, no, our first mission is to the Federation. So they behave like a completely normal crew. All of the Maquis crew sort of fall into line. You get a bit of anger from B'Elanna Torres, the chief engineer, occasionally, but that's purely just to remind us she's half Klingon, so she's got a bit of a temper. The antagonists they meet early on are like the Kazon, who are like, if the Klingon were made out of broccoli, this would be what they are. The show looks tired and it's frightened to take chances, so it takes none. And what you end up with is so pale compared to what came before. It also really starts this fucking trend I hate that we see in Enterprise as well, of almost fetishizing the ship. In Enterprise, there's a point where the ensign on, and I forgot his fucking name, which tells you everything, has a go at flying the ship or sitting in the captain's chair, and he's one step away from whipping it out and having a wank. He's so excited. And it's the same on this ship when Harry Kim gets a go. What I will say is it's quite attractive. They've got a low lighting on the bridge that I quite like, but it pisses away its premise. Charlie, what do you think?
Yeah, the thing is, Voyager came out in 1995, which was 2 years after Deep Space Nine has launched, and it feels like a reaction to the early fan talk or whatever that people had against Deep Space Nine, because it took place on a station, because it was all about conflict, because it was a very different view of Star Trek than we'd seen before. It feels like very much a knee-jerk reaction of that, and very much back towards, okay, well, let's do it about a ship again, and we'll have it about exploring, but we've already done this, so we'll have it in this quadrant, so we'll send them back. Yeah, it's very boring, it's very bland. The characters are all pretty annoying.
We've seen versions of them before as well.
Exactly, they're all very thin, kind of. You've just taken the previous characters and just kind of mixed them around a bit. Very, very tired. The Kazon are the worst villains in the history of science fiction ever, and they're just like cavemen. And yeah, they just astonishingly bad, some of it.
But there are one or two really, really good episodes. There are.
Oh yes, yes. I mean,
no Star Trek is entirely worthless.
Yeah, you can always count on some.
And also, it's probably got a better first season than Next Gen as well. It starts a little stronger.
Yeah.
I watched 2 or 3 of the better episodes from the first season and thought, oh, this is going to be great, and then it wasn't.
Yeah. I think really the saving grace for me was the Doctor, the holographic Doctor. I love Robert Picardo, the actor. I love anyway in pretty much everything he's done. He did a lot of films with Joe Dante, and he was also Kevin Arnold's gym teacher in the Wonder Years.
No.
Yeah, he was. Always wore a baseball cap in that, but yeah.
And he was a werewolf in The Howling.
No.
He was the one who did the main transformation.
He's brilliant. He's the one bit of the show that I look at and say, no other show's actually done the Doctor better. There were a couple I like as much, like Bones is brilliant, but he's great and he really does stand out. And
he does actually appear in one of the films.
He does.
So does Janeway as well, but
that's a character. Really, that doesn't matter.
No, but yeah, it's kind of like I just gave up after a while, and I don't regret giving up at all.
And then, of course, we move on to Enterprise, which I feel very similar about.
I think that's why it failed the way it did, because it came at the end where, obviously, the series was already very tired.
It's on life by now. It's 14 years old. Star Trek has run uninterrupted, often more than one series at a time. In fact, for all but 5 years of that time, Star Trek has run like 2 seasons at a time for 14 years. Everything has its day, and it's a lot of the same people in charge, like Rick Berman and Brannon Braga and stuff. They get a lot of shit now, and Brannon Braga made the point that like it's because I was there at the end. People forget the good stuff we did, and they're right, but they've run out of ideas, and they weren't taking any chances with it. And Enterprise is all very fucking safe too.
I do want to. I think I'd go and revisit it or visit it someone because I've never seen it. Apart from like a couple of bits and pieces, but I think what put me off was the theme song.
But I mean the biggest problem for me with Enterprise is it's a bit like when you get a remake of like Halloween and they've got to show you in depth Mike Myers' background, or the Killing Joke, and we're shown how the Joker came to be, and it's stuff that actually detracts knowing. Well, for example, the Klingons in Kirk's era do not have ridged foreheads. They're a bit darker and they've got goatees. That's all. By the feature film era, they've got ridged foreheads, and by later TNG and DS9, they've got really ridged foreheads. Enterprise felt the need to explain that, and it, with some sort of virus storyline, and it's like, let it go. It was makeup, and so it's bollocks, and it really is stupid. You have them sort of meeting Ferengi and Borg and Romulans, even though they sort of didn't. So they kind of cheat their way round it. And I don't think Scott Bakula, I mean, I like Scott Bakula a lot, but I don't think he's particularly well suited as a captain. He's got very little gravitas. He's much better at oh boy. And the second officer, the science officer in it, Jolene Blaylock, who plays T'Pol, she is what I'm talking about when I talk about people completely missing what a Vulcan is, because she just plays it with zero intonation in her voice whatsoever. So everything is delivered unbelievably flat, and I'm thinking, has no one showed this woman like Leonard Nimoy?
You didn't go back and watch the original series?
Yeah, I think it's quite weak. The one thing it's got going for it is they do go for like a submarine aesthetic, and they do have like quarters where they're sleeping in bunk beds and stuff. And I think that's quite a logical precursor. So it's not worthless, but I mean, I tried to rewatch it recently, and I had them all on Blu-ray, and I have seen all of it. But after 11, I think I got through about 11 episodes and then just went, forget it. I was going to watch it everything before we got to this. It's not good enough. The show is tired.
I just want to go back to what you were saying about the Klingons. Just to go back to DS9 a sec, there's an episode of DS9 called Trials and Tribulations, which was which was for the 30th anniversary of Star Trek, which had which basically crossed over at DS9 with the original The Trouble with Tribbles episode. And there is one section where you see the Klingons from that original episode in the bar, and you have
Ivan Drago's manager.
Yeah. And you have Worf and Dr. Bashir and Chief O'Brien in the and Odo in this bar, and they see these Klingons, and then all look at Worf, and he just says, "It is something we do not talk about to outsiders."
But I much prefer that explanation. It's just like it's just a little sort of jokey like thing. Yeah. You don't have to like. Well, we'll get into that right now. Nudge, wink, done.
It's like Worf moves to DS9, yeah. And yet he manages to be on the Enterprise in all of the films. Now, in the first one, they explain it. And by the end, as he's about to explain it, the sound drops off and they go to somebody else. And I like that. It's just like, you don't have to explain everything. And that's what Enterprise was trying to do. And it's just filling in all these gaps we don't care about, instead of it writing its own story in its own path. So I don't think it's that good. I do know people who like it a lot. I don't think it's worthless. I think there are good episodes of it, but I think it's comfortably the weakest of it. It's along with Voyager. They are the bottom two for me. Before we're done tonight, we really ought to just touch upon the films and what we think, the structure of what we're going to do and what we think of the films before we revisit. So, Charlie, let's start with you, because obviously you're the fan. Without ranking them, we don't want to do that, but generally speaking, which do you like, which don't you like?
Which don't I like? Star Trek Into Darkness.
Is that about it?
I'm not a massive fan of Nemesis, but other than that, really, there's no other Star Trek that I don't like. I think Into Darkness, because of what it tried to do, what it attempted, and what it failed so badly at doing, is so kind of insulting to Star Trek itself. That is why I don't like it. But I mean, I'm pretty easy. There are certain varying degrees of quality, and I will say I'm not a massive fan of First Contact, which obviously we'll discuss when we get to that one. Yeah. But the one, I mean, my favourite is the motion picture, and I think it's just a really underappreciated film, and I think there are kind of angles from which to see that film, and the kind of context which people don't perhaps take into account, Again, because it has a very deliberate pacing, which has led some people to call it the slow motion picture.
Or the motionless picture.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, Charlie, of all the films to put motion in the title of from this series, but yeah.
There's very much of it.
There's a lot of motion.
I'm joking.
There's Shatner's eyebrows and toupee.
His wig.
But and it's because the Wrath of Khan in the original series, there's a very different pace to it, and sort of certainly much more towards maybe something like 2001 or something like that. Certainly, I'm not putting it in the same area of quality, but I mean, I'm a big fan of Star Trek. Wrath of Khan is kind of goes without saying. I mean, objectively, it's the best one, even though Star Trek Motion Pictures is my favourite. I'm a big fan of Star Trek 3, which a lot of people aren't necessarily a fan of.
Yeah, that gets quite a hard time. Yeah,
and I like Star Trek 5 quite a bit. Again, not necessarily objectively.
I have a soft spot for 5, I'll be honest with you.
And Generations. But again, we'll argue over that later on.
That in a minute. Chris, what about you with the films?
First one, motion picture, I've not really sat through and watched, but I understand my basic conception is basically it's like a typical 40, 55 minute Star Trek episode, but just extended with long gazing shots into like an actual 90-minute running time or something like that.
There's actually only one of those, but it is about 6.5 minutes long.
But that's the impression I get before sitting watching it. So that's what I'm expecting. Wrath of Khan I've seen a few times. Great. I think 3 suffers from being like part one of a story kind of deal, but I don't think it's bad, but I think it suffers from like a story that's unfinished. It ends in a place where it's not a satisfying conclusion. 4, actually, I don't think I've actually sat down and watched 4 properly as well.
That tends to be the non-Star Trek fans' favourite,
so,
if you like, and I'm not knocking it for that, but it is. It's very accessible to non-fans.
So I'll be interested to see how that play, whether it's actually funny or whether it's whether I even like it at all. Star Trek 5, I'll agree. I think it's a bad film, but it's you sound shocked, but
I don't know. You're going to say that.
Universally panned film is bad.
Another news, man. Step and puddle, get a foot wet.
It's a bad film, but it's one of those films that is kind of almost so bad it's good, but it has touches of I think in its idea, I think it's got a good idea going for it, and it has a few moments. It has particularly one of my favourite Kirk moments.
Let's hold that till we get to it, but I know the moment you're on about.
The other Kirk moment is in Wrath of Khan. I think, and then Star Trek 6, Undiscovered Country, and first cinematic Star Trek. Again, I really like. It's like Wrath of Khan. I think it's up there. It's just a really. I think I was actually thinking about it the other day. If I was to actually introduce someone to Star Trek in the terms of the films, I think Undiscovered Country would be like a good shout to show someone. Because I think that's a good example of a Star Trek film that's accessible to everyone. I think you can sit anyone in front of anyone, whether like haven't even seen an episode or seen anything of Star Trek. And they get it. I think that it works as a story without any prior knowledge. And then we get Generations, which I think is okay. I think it's like your general 3-star Star Trek film. Contact, which I think is basically along the same lines, but I think it goes in a bit more action, shooty McShootin, like space battle type thing, which is probably more entertaining. And then Insurrection, which again is kind of like a Star Trek standard, like 2-parter, next gen episode, but sort of strung together as a film. And Nemesis, which I have seen, which I think is kind of like dumb fun, but I think to Star Trek as an idea is a bit of a slap in the face. And of course the remakes, the reboots, if you will. Really enjoyed the first JJ film. I rewatched Into Darkness recently, and I gotta say I actually really enjoyed it. Apart from the last third, where it just becomes like an absolute train wreck. No, what the fuck are you doing? But as a blockbuster kind of popcorn flick, I think it's okay. But as a Star Trek film, it's terrible. But we'll get there. We'll see how I feel when I watch it again. And the new one is okay.
Becky, you've not seen a few of them.
No, I think I've seen the first, like the motion picture, and the second one, probably ages ago. I think when I was getting into it, but the other original series I've not seen, sadly. So there's kind of me at the bottom, and there's you and Charlie at the top, and then Chris somewhere in the middle. And then obviously I saw all the Generation ones. I think the first one came out, I must have been like 10, I think, when it came out, so maybe I caught it on home release. And then saw the rest in the cinema with my dad. And obviously seen all the reboot series. Quite love the 2009 film. Found that really enjoyable. Into Darkness, I feel the same way as Chris about it. Kind of like it's a decent action movie, but a Star Trek film, not so much. And obviously Benedict Cumberbatch is amazing. But I think when I come to obviously just being a massive Sherlock fan generally, so that's where it all comes from. But yeah, I think what I'll do is I'll go and watch Wrath of Khan, and then I'll go back and see. I'll probably see, Into Darkness and a New Light.
It won't be a positive one.
No. But yeah, Beyond, I really enjoyed. Lovely tribute there. Lots of nods to the original series, and a lot of sort of nods to kind of like various aspects of the original series and various different races and episode. References to individual episodes themselves, where like core hardcore Trek fans will love, and even casual fans can appreciate. But no, I'm kind of looking forward to actually seeing some of these films for the first time. I'm being like the complete series newbie, so yeah, looking forward to it.
With me, the original Crew films, there's one I don't like, one which is 5, but I've not seen it that often. I saw it a couple of times. It's basically William Shatner's Ego feature length. He's the director of it, and Shatner's always needs to be reined in, really. The film's not helped by the fact that really cheap. Some of the effects and all the rest of it, they went, it's not been helped by that. The motion picture I'm not sure about is the honest answer. I put it on. I love the way it starts. The bit everyone hates, which is Kirk, being flown to the Enterprise, I love, because I just love that arrangement of the music, and he sells me that sense of wonder. And not only that ship's beautiful. It's a complete refit. It's the first time we've seen it since the original series, which was this little grey block, which was an attractive design in itself, but the reboot's lovely, and it's simple. It's kept simple, which is some of the problems I've got with the reboot, where they try and make it look like a fucking muscle car or something.
Go faster stripes and all.
Well, no, I don't mind the reboot one either, but certainly the nacelles are way too fucking chunky. But I do like that Enterprise with its blue light. I think that's lovely. The Wrath of Khan is my Majesty's for this series. I genuinely adore it. I cried at it the first several times I saw it. I think it got me quite emotional. It's made on a TV budget, so what it doesn't have that, say, Majesty's have is it's not a particularly beautiful film, but it sounds good and it's brilliant.
It's what you do with it. It's what you do with the budget. That's what counts.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a brilliant...
Quality, not quantity.
I agree. But there are a couple of films in this series that are properly beautiful, and this isn't one of them. Star Trek 3 looks a bit cheap in places. It's not as good, but it's enjoyable. It is enjoyable. 4 I really like. Again, it's not fashionable amongst Trek fans to say that. It's a little bit like the one with the whales. But but this crew have such an easy ambience with each other, and that film really plays it excellent. And 6 I watched very recently. I've not seen it as often as some, but there's a thread in it I don't like that we'll talk about when we get there that I think is Murder, She Wrote. But the actual broad strokes of the film and what the film's trying to achieve, I think is magnificent, and I think it's a wonderful film. Generations, I think, is actually crap, but entertaining crap, in that it's a bit like GoldenEye. You put it under a modicum of analysis, and it utterly falls apart.
Oh, poor GoldenEye.
But similarity with GoldenEye is they're both entertaining. I think actually Generations might be the most purely entertaining next-gen film. First Contact is lauded as this great thing. It's the prettiest. I love the new ship they've got in that one. I think it's very attractive. They've got the new uniforms and everything else. There's a lot to be said for it, but by then the Borg have been defanged. And when we get to it, I will pick a lot of flaws with it. So it's okay. Insurrection is basically a TV episode. I don't know why it's on the big screen. It's okay. Nemesis I really enjoyed at the time. On rewatch, not so much. It's got a horrible green colour palette as well. It's a sort of film that makes you a bit queasy. And on the reboots, the first one is the rarest beast in the world, in that it's a great film with a terrible script. And that's normally not possible. Normally you cannot transcend bad writing. It's badly written, and yet it's so much fun. And I walked out a bit emotional because I walked out with the music playing that plays over the credits, and also I had Star Trek back, so it was really great. Beyond, I'm just going to skip into Darkness for a minute. Beyond is, again, a bit like a TV episode with a huge budget of the original series. It's got that sort of New Frontier feel to it. And finally, Pine's actually sort of grown into the chair, kind of. Into Darkness, I am going to fucking monster. I warn you now. Now, when I ranked them for somebody after Into Darkness came out, I think because it was shiny, I put it somewhere just below the middle. But it's got worse. The more you think about it, the worse it gets. And it's easy to put it above something like a 5 because bigger budget, shiny. It's fucking retarded. And when we get to it, I will monster it. It's a dreadful film.
I can't wait for that, to be honest with you.
I'm really looking forward to it. I think that's going to be my favourite.
Well, I already did part of it on I think it was License to Kill. I started talking about it. I don't know how much of a rant. It would depend on my mood on the night, but it's not a good film. But we were asked tonight on Twitter about commentaries. It's a 19-episode series. We've got the opener tonight. We've then got the 6 original series crew films. We then have 2 commentaries. The Wrath of Khan was a given. We didn't even put that to the vote. But we put the other 5 to the vote. And there was a clear favourite, 38% of you, and it was quite a few voted for The Voyage Home. So we will be commentating on Star Trek 2 and Star Trek 4. Then we will cover the Next Generation films and 2 of the 3 reboots. We may change the order when we get there, but we will do the Next Generation and then the newer films, but we may leave Beyond until after the commentaries. We don't know. But then we put the Next Generation films to the vote, and I was a little bit surprised by this. I thought First Contact would win, but we had a slight win, 45% against 39, voted for Generations, which I'm quite pleased about because it's entertaining, but there's so much more to rip apart. And then we put the 2 that were on home release at the time to the vote, and 60% went for Star Trek 2009. So that's the commentary for the reboot crew. And then we will do a Star Trek Beyond, and we will also do a rankings episode.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to digging into the films because there's some I'm not exactly 100%, much like next week with the motion picture, because I'm not actually sat down and watched it in its entirety. I'm looking forward to. I'm especially looking forward to listening to you rant about Into Darkness. It'll be.
I'm very much looking forward to that one. I think that's going to be one of the highlights of the series. I think another Dave rant is what we like.
Yeah. Okay. For a preview of it, I think it's our License to Kill commentary. We started talking about it, so I had a bit of a mini rant there because the film is really dumb. And not only is it dumb, if you're going to evoke a film from your past, don't evoke the best and then make a shit version of it.
It's kind of it's to be expected. It's like, well, second film we're going to do Khan, boring, But also, it's not kind of a remake of Wrath of Khan. It's a remake of Space Seed, really, if you want to be technical. Yeah,
but it's also the world's worst kept secret. Is he Khan? No, he's John Harrison. No, he's obviously Khan. Come on.
I wish he'd been Blofeld. Just to
epic budget like Sherlock and Blofeld. Oh my god, the whole Sherlock community.
It's Max the Parrot. When did it come
Give us a kiss.
Is Max the Parrot?
Oh god.
Yeah, it's not good,
Good old Max.
and it's getting worse. And I see people trying to defend it, and I don't want to go into it too much now. But most things I talk about on this show are opinion. You know, I don't like a film. I do like a film. I say why. That's it. I am going to argue at the time that Into Darkness is objectively a bad film. I don't think it's a matter of opinion at all. It's objectively a bad film.
I'm still scared I might have to defend Into Darkness in a weird
No,
way.
don't. Let's all
Me too,
shit
me
on
too.
it. Let's all take a big, great turd on it. Go on.
I'll be coming from the Sherlock camp.
I won't be, because Sherlock became shit by its third season. But
Oh god, yeah, it definitely got worse and worse as it went along, I think. But I'm looking forward to the new series anyway. But that's going to be a whole other podcast.
It's a bizarre argument. I mean, I quite like the first series of Heroes before it went to shit, but it's not.
Crap.
It's not a way to defend this.
No.
oh shit, fun facts.
Fun facts. Make it so.
Come on, Cole, check back! 50, 50, 50, 50!
It's fun fact number 1. Obviously, Trek turns 50 this year. The first episode being broadcast in September 66, as we mentioned earlier. Fun fact number 2. Obviously, as we mentioned earlier, if it wasn't for Lucille Ball, we'd be no Star Trek at all. Which also rhymes. It rhymes. It's done. Fun fact number 3. Michelle Nichols was also the first African-American woman to hold an important role in the US sci-fi TV series. Fun fact number 4. It would be interesting to look at why during the series as well. The Star Trek movies haven't historically made. I mean, they've made money, but they haven't made massive amounts at the box office. But I think also reading and altogether, it's made over about $2 billion at the box office, which is pretty impressive, I think.
That's 4/5 fun, folks. Charlie, can you make it 5/5 fun?
Yeah, Star Trek has had quite a few celebrity cameos over the years. One of the most interesting ones was Mick Fleetwood from Fleetwood Mac, who appeared as an alien in one of the episodes of The Next Generation.
That's now completely fun, folks.
Right, where can we find us all on social media?
Me, you can find out the Plastic Kid 1976 on Twitter.
You can find me at Cinematronics on Twitter, and you can find this podcast on my website, which is at cinematronics.co.uk.
You can find me at Films on Wax on Twitter.
You can find me at RV Movies. You can find us at Expect to Talk on Twitter, and also the same on Facebook. You can email us, expectustotalk@gmail.com.
And also, if you go to Films on Wax, their iTunes feed, which would you search under Films on Wax or under Movie Drone, Charlie?
Just put Films on Wax into iTunes.
Charlie just I mean, it's worth listening to anyway, but particularly pertinent to this, you just did a 2-part show on the music of Trek. We've been fully inducted into the world of Trek, which means Becca!
We will return with Star Trek: The Motion Picture.